Good afternoon. Good afternoon and welcome to all of you. I'd like to thank the Pipeline Training Center for allowing us to be here this afternoon for this hearing of the Senate, field hearing of the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee. Before I begin my remarks, I would like to invite Chad Hutchison to come and give us a little bit of a welcome and a safety moment, if he will.
Welcome.
There you go.
Welcome to the Fairbanks Pipeline Training Center. Thank everybody for coming and joining us today. We're just going to start out with a few quick notes here in a safety minute, as we do with all our meetings here at the training center. First thing I'd like to point out is the exits, in case of an emergency. We have a couple exits over to the side, out the back, down the hall. Muster point, if we all have to leave, will be over at our camp. We have a construction camp over here, and it's got a big letter E on the front of it, E. So that'll be our muster point. And there is an AED machine just across the hall out here on the wall, should we need that, and hopefully we don't. The restrooms are just across the hall to the right also. With that being said, I'd like to have a little safety minute. With spring coming to Fairbanks, we all get really excited. We want to get out. We want to do things. Temperatures are getting up into the 40s. But we have to keep in mind it's getting down into the 20s at night, so it's still freezing. We need to allow ourselves a little bit extra time, especially in the morning. Tomorrow morning, they say it's going to snow a couple of inches tonight again. So if that happens, we all know there's going to be ice underneath that snow. So we're going to have to be careful where we're walking, what we're doing, pay attention. My wife, unfortunately, knows this all too well. She is currently healing up from a surgery on her shoulder where she slipped in a parking lot on the ice. So please take your time, walking, driving, whatever it may be, watching out for yourself, and more importantly for the person that's in a hurry next to you. They're kind of the hidden danger and everything. So with that, thank you. Senator?
Thank you, Chad. Appreciate it. And again, thank you for the opportunity to be in your facility here today. I'd like to welcome all of the witnesses that have joined us for an important discussion about resource development within the state of Alaska. As many of you, I'm sure, know, it was gold mining that ultimately determined where we are here in Fairbanks. It was Captain Barnett's riverboat that ran out of draft on the Chena, and fate determined where his mining supply business was to be located. And while Barnett was perhaps too late and too far away to profit from the Klondike gold rush, he was part of that gold rush and that led us to modern day. Today, Fort Knox and Pogo, both world-class mines north and south of the city, continue the proud tradition that give meaning to Fairbanks' motto. This region, like so much of our state, is blessed with vast natural resources that we can use to gain prosperity and fulfill the promises of statehood. Today's Seward's Day. I actually forgot about that when we had scheduled this hearing, but it is Seward's Day, and there's still a little bit of laughter and chuckle when people think about Seward's icebox or Seward's Folly. But not even Seward could have conceived of the resource wealth when the U.S. purchased from Russia this amazing state. Alaska has what virtually no one else has. Tens of billions of barrels of oil, hundreds of trillions of cubic feet of natural gas, a massive supply of coal, countless deposits of hard rock minerals, of course, renewable resources beyond imagination. And if we can harness them, we can supply them to the rest of our nation to sustain our growth, our competitiveness, and our security. Really, our hardest task is not in finding the resources or developing the know-how or recruiting the manpower needed to responsibly produce them. Instead, it's really overcoming the restrictions that are imposed, oftentimes by our own federal government, which fails to understand why Alaska must be allowed to explore and to develop. Tens of millions of acres of our lands and waters have been unilaterally withdrawn in recent years, against our strongest objections, and in my view, oftentimes in violation of the law. The 1002 area of ANWR remains locked away. The federal government has made commercial production all but impossible in the offshore Arctic. It took far longer for CD5 in a national petroleum reserve to gain regulatory approval than it should have. We've also witnessed repeated attempts to expand the use of pseudo-wilderness designations from aquatic resources of national importance to areas of critical environmental concern and outstanding national resource waters, all to circumvent ANILCA's no more clauses and to stop development. At the same time, federal agencies have generally become less cooperative, less willing to work with us to get to yes than to start and stay at no. Even producing on state lands has become more difficult, more costly, more complex, and more time-consuming for the likes of ASRC and OTNA by virtue of actions that are taken at the federal level. We also face a crush of national regulations, from the Waters of the United States rule to the Stream Protection Rule, and a movement that believes that keeping needed resources in the ground will somehow result in a safer, more stable world. And all of this comes at a time of low resource prices, at a time when the federal government should be trying to protect the competitiveness of our extractive industries, not finding ways to close off access and strand their capital. This is a time when we should be opening our lands and waters to responsible development, streamlining the permitting process, and working to ensure that protests and litigation do not hold us back. This is a critical time for resource production in our state. I believe that we need to speak up. We need to highlight the hypocrisy that we see in efforts to lock down our lands while at the same time demonstrating how well we care for the environment as we develop our natural resources. And there's no better way to do that than by hearing from Alaskans who know the benefits that come from increased resource production and what needs to be done at the federal level to unleash our potential. We have played a tremendous amount of defense in recent years and in many ways have kind of held our own. But in the remaining months of this administration, we could yet again be put back on our heels, and we must be prepared for a new administration that will take office just 10 months from now, not knowing whether it will be friendlier in nature or perhaps even more antagonistic. So we've got our work cut out for us. That any resource project can survive the current interplay between federal agencies and millions of pages of rules and countless more pages of guidelines, manuals, legal opinions, and planning documents seems almost miraculous, but we know that it can be done. The states, including Alaska, typically permit projects in a fraction of the time that it takes the federal government. The offshore regulatory regime imposed in Alaska may be chaotic, but look at other countries. Look at Norway and Russia that have vibrant programs in their OCS regions. We can also look around the world and realize that it should take far less than 7 to 10 years for a new mine to begin operation. But I am optimistic about Alaska's future. We have resources that all other nations covet. We're a provider in a growing and a hungry world. We know that prices are low right now, but we've seen prices go up and we've seen prices go down. And a majority of our citizens strongly support production because they understand the wide-ranging benefits that made in the USA carries, whether it's high-paying jobs to revenues to energy and national security. So today we're gathering good ideas and counsels on how we might amend, reform, direct, and provide oversight of federal law and federal agencies. This is an opportunity, again, to hear from many in the sectors across the state. We have a strong panel, 3 strong panels that are with us this afternoon, and the plan or the schedule for the next almost 3 hours will be to hear from the 3 panels, taking testimony about 5 minutes from each. I'll have an opportunity at the conclusion of the panel to direct questions to the panelists. Once we have concluded that panel, if we have time before the conclusion of the 4 o'clock hour, which I'm most hopeful that we will invite people who have joined us here this afternoon to offer their public comment. We'd ask that the comment be limited. There is a sign-up sheet somewhere in the back, at the back of the room, there with Mr. Haymans, and when we get to this point or that point in the afternoon, we'll give further instructions as to how we will move forward with that portion of the testimony. So with that, I would like to commence with the first panel. It will be led off by Michelle Anderson, who is president of OTNA Incorporated. It's good to have Michelle here and her leadership in a host of different areas. We just visited last week down in Anchorage. Admiral Tom Barrett, who is the president of Alaska Pipeline Service Company, is with us. He will be followed by Mr. Richard Glenn, who is the executive vice president for Arctic Slope Regional Corporation. And then the final panelist on panel 1 is Mr. Joe Marushak, who is president for ConocoPhillips Alaska. With that, ladies and gentlemen, Michelle, if you would like to start off, and know that your full written statement will be included as part of the record, as will all those who provide testimony to us this afternoon. So welcome to the field hearing, and thank you for being here. And if you would like to begin with your comments.
Thank you, Senator. Good afternoon. My name is Michelle Anderson. I am pleased to have the opportunity to provide comments to the committee. I am a tribal member of the Native Village of Gulkana, an OTNA shareholder and president of OTNA Incorporated. OTNA is the smallest Alaska regional corporation established under ANCSA in 1971 and represents the interests of over 1,900 OTNA Athabascan shareholders. The OTNA region encompasses 8 villages and holds title to 1.6 million acres of land in south central Alaska. All of our villages are connected by the road system. Raised in the OTNA region, I am deeply committed to protecting my culture and our way of life, responsible land development, and securing economic benefits for those I serve. I believe that these goals can coexist. OTNA's lands extend from the Denali Preserve to Chitna. They surround North America's tallest peak, Mount Denali, to America's largest national park, Wrangell-St. Elias. OTNA has 622,000 acres of land in the Wrangell-St. Elias National Park and Preserve, lands that our elders selected prior to the creation of the park. OTNA is now one of the largest inholders of private property of public lands in the United States. Our lands are of paramount importance to the OTNA people who have lived here for thousands of years and depend on hunting, fishing, and other resources to sustain our way of life. OTNA's leaders made it possible for the Trans-Alaska Pipeline System to be constructed from 1974 to 1977. A 55-mile corridor through OTNA's fee simple lands was set aside for the 48-inch diameter pipeline. TAPS, Pump Station 11, and the Glen Allen Response Base were built near my family's home. TAPS has transported approximately 17 billion barrels of oil through our lands in a safe and environmentally sound manner. My family, like so many others, directly benefited from TAPS as both my parents worked on the pipeline. In fact, my father still works on TAPS today for Alaska Pipeline Service Company. OTNA shareholders and many other Alaska regional and village corporations have benefited from TAPS with employment, contracting, and training opportunities. In 2015, 39% of OTNA employees on TAPS were Alaska Native. These are highly prized jobs and a great work environment. OTNA's concern is that TAPS is operating at approximately 25% of its capacity. The state of Alaska with Prudhoe Bay and Kaparik have opened up their lands for safe and responsible resource development. Alaska Native corporations like ASRC and Kupik Corporation made Alpine possible. ASRC shares 70% of the profits derived from Alpine with other regional corporations as a provision of 7I of ANCSA. Alaskans finally got our first North Slope oil from the federally owned NPRA with CD5 in late 2015. ConocoPhillips and its predecessor companies have tried for a very long period of time to develop oil. Senator Murkowski has been a vocal advocate of cleaning up NPRA from damages inflicted by the federal government over the last 60-plus years, and it's finally happening. It takes years, even decades, to drill just one exploratory well when the federal government is involved in the process. Our TAPS pipeline needs a lot more oil, which needs to come from federal lands. Speaking as the mother of 2 sons in college, they will need work opportunities to remain living in Alaska. The federal government owns over 60% of Alaska's 365 million acres of land. OTNA has proven that a major world-class pipeline like TAPS can safely transport through our own lands. TAPS just needs more oil, particularly from federal lands, to keep running for future generations. In August 2015, I had the pleasure of meeting with President Obama along with other Alaska Native leaders. I stressed to the President the importance of the Alaska LNG for OTNA and for all Alaskans. Approximately 35 miles of the proposed Alaska LNG pipeline would flow underneath our beautiful OTNA land. The OTNA people will require this project to be constructed to the highest worldwide standards, including materials and personnel. We are confident that the state of Alaska and its industry partners will be able to deliver. For the benefit of OTNA shareholders and all Alaskans, we need the federal government to open up their lands in a timely manner. This must include efficient land leases, permitting, and a collaborative relationship with the state of Alaska and industry for both oil and gas and mining. OTNA owns some of the most pristine lands in the world, and we have proven that development can occur safely and to the economic benefit of all Alaskans. The vast majority of Alaska's federally owned resource-rich lands are seldom, if ever, seen by Alaskans. In 1971, 45 years ago, INGSA was passed. OTNA was to receive title to land of 1.77 million acres. All these years later, we are still waiting for 250,000 acres to complete our land settlement. Alaskans are frustrated that the federal government does not move very fast when Alaska acreage is part of the equation. We need the federal government to take a proactive approach with their vast acreage to provide economic benefits for OTNA and all Alaskans. Several Alaska regional corporations, including Doyon and OTNA, are attempting to develop our own lands for oil and gas development. We need major oil and gas and mining companies to continue making multi-billion-dollar investments in Alaska to keep TAPS running for the next 40 years, to protect our OTNA culture, and to provide economic benefits to our shareholders. On behalf of all the OTNA people, I sincerely appreciated the opportunity to speak today. Chinan.
Thank you, Michelle. Admiral Barrett, welcome to the committee.
Chairman McCaskey, thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I'm particularly delighted to have this opportunity at the Pipeline Safety Training Center. LESCA has been proud to be a part of supporting this organization since startup, and they have helped train many of the high-skilled, very smart, very tough workers that our company, our industry, and actually the state depends on. So I want to thank them for that also. They've been a huge basis of our success. So in terms of opportunity, TAPS, Trans-Alaska Pipeline System, is fundamentally sound infrastructure, although it's a little old, but it's fundamentally sound. We have an extremely strong workforce, and we're operating well under capacity. This morning I saw a note from Clint Van Winkeren. He's our oil movements engineering director. He was up at Pump Station 1 on Friday, and we ran a successful full load test on new pumps that we've installed up there, new booster pumps. That's part of our renewal process on the system. And so we ran them up to a full load and proved it was running fine. That's 1.09 million barrel flow rate. Today, one of the best days we've had this winter on the pipeline, and our numbers are higher in the winter than in the summer, we were at 556,000 barrels. So without any change, without any strain, without any lift, we could take in up to 1.9 million barrels if it was available to us today. The low flow, as you know, and I've talked before, it creates many challenges with water and wax and just the flow rate. It's kind of like your car. It's designed, TAPS is, to run very efficiently. Your vehicle is at 55, 60 miles an hour down the highway. If you ran it all the time at 15 or 20 miles an hour, you get soot buildup, your spark plugs clog, pretty soon you get backfires. You need to maintain the car much more aggressively, and that's kind of TAPS. We're running well below the space that we were designed to run in. We're confident we can handle that. We've got a great workforce, and we're constantly renewing, but it is costly, it's increasingly complex, and it's difficult for us to do. We do know, and our workforce knows, both our own employees and our contractors, that we need to operate safely, and we do. Last year was the safest year ever in TAP's history. We had near perfect reliability. We had an extremely strong environmental record. And as you look around at some of the recognition our people have gotten, we received the API Large Pipeline Operator Award for Environmental Performance. We received the Governance Safety Award. For the 5th year in a row, we were selected as one of the world's most ethical companies. And we received our Vessel of Opportunity program in Prince William Sound received an Ocean Stewardship Award from the Alaska Sea Life Center. My point to you, though, that the backbone of our organization is not simply infrastructure, it's our people, both blue-collar and white-collar workforces. We're over 90% Alaska-based. 70%, by the way, our partnerships with our contractors are Alaska-based companies. But we're 20% Alaska Native. We're over 30% women. We're over 33% minority. And our key partners include companies like Doyon and ARSC and Otna and Chugach and NANA. We're very proud of that. And our people, in many cases, are the backbones in their communities. So the benefit that comes is not just the jobs, but the people that come with those jobs, the families that come with those jobs, and what they contribute to their communities, whether it's food banks, United Way, coaching sport teams, being active in churches. They are the backbone of many Alaska communities. We're very proud of that. They're very generous with their time, their leadership, and their energy. So the key to our the key to our sustainability is throughput. I heard a statement, up in Fairbanks here, you had a big week last week with the Arctic Council meetings. I heard Elsie Brett Eklund, the Norwegian ambassador to the Arctic Council, speak 2 weeks ago in Anchorage. And she said Norway supports more oil development in the Barents Sea. And this is a senior Norwegian official, recognizing the risks. And she said the reason they do that is because they understand that what comes with that development is foundational to the health and well-being of their communities. And Norway has the highest percentage of any circumpolar nation actually living above the Arctic Circle. So I think that's the opportunity to both sustain and create more opportunities for that. Senator, you've mentioned many times before we need better access, we need an improved regulatory environment, and if we get that, I think we can safely deliver oil that benefits U.S. national security, the state of Alaska broadly, and many thousands of people who work on, support, and benefit from our activities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. Mr. Glenn, welcome. Escaped from the volcano. Barrow is closed down because of the volcano.
Yeah, if you're headed to Bethel or Nome or Kotzebue or Barrow, you shouldn't be flying today. The airlines have closed down the west half and north portion of our state. Thank you, Senator, for inviting me to this hearing. My name is Richard Glenn. I'm Vice President of Lands Natural Resources for Arctic Slope Regional Corporation, and I am grateful to be on this panel today, and I was excited to learn about Otna's history, and I hope that in my brief testimony you get a little bit of a picture of the Arctic Slope region as well and our views on these important issues. There's 4 key points that I'd like to present today, and my written testimony will go into greater detail. These points focus mostly on the challenges and barriers to responsible oil and gas development, mineral development in Alaska. We are an oil and gas dependent state, and resources extracted from our region are the main artery of Alaska's economy. Over the years, we've faced significant challenges, and my written comments goes into detail, chapter and verse, on those challenges. But the 4 broad points I'd like to take a look at is, first of all, look at the balance of development with respect to communities, Arctic communities. Today's debate seems to sway from absolute, complete, enveloping protection and stay there, rather than this balance of responsible development and protecting the environment, safe development. Rather than mothballing Arctic resources at the detriment of local communities, consider how tribal and native communities are empowered by development, and whether the risk has already been mitigated in the plan for development. Our local leadership works to provide controls on development in our region so that the mitigation is already there when the development proceeds. This preserves the environment, this allows for a local economy, and allows our local subsistence activities to put food on our tables. The local perspective should not be overlooked, dismissed, or marginalized as the federal government develops resources in the Arctic. Second, I would urge that the federal government resist the permanent setting aside of large swaths of lands and ocean in the name of, for example, species protection. The Arctic is home to these huge migrations of animals that they go from east to west, north to south, and they go in and out of the frame of the picture for any small, special set-aside patch of land or ocean. It's the migration and the seasonality of ice cover and open water is so big that it renders these small parcels almost meaningless. The polar bear critical habitat designation, for example, which is about as big as the state of California, is probably the most well-known example of this, but there are many others. And there's potentially going to exist many more. But our experience, both onshore and offshore, is that setting aside of huge swaths of land often has unintended negative impacts. Third, I would like to thank the administration for embracing green and renewable energy. There can be an appropriate mix of extractive industry and green energy, but green energy, for example, in rural Alaska is not a replacement for commercial development. Also, it's not even a replacement for the diesel fuel, for example, in our region, that's the lifeblood of the smallest villages. But all you have to do is travel just up the hill here to the Cold Climate Housing Research Center and look at some marvelous successes in solar power and energy conservation. But we embrace this technology, but we recognize it for what it is. Finally, we have issues with respect to the several agencies within the federal government on education. It's difficult to educate them about Alaska Native issues. I think that in this administration we've made great progress on tribal consultation, but there still needs to be an awareness of this kind of braided rope relationship that we have, especially in my region, between tribes, municipalities, and the ANCSA corporations. ANCSA land ownership, resource ownership benefits tribal members. And so although we're three different animals, we represent the same constituency and we are braided together like strands of a rope. The administration appears not to understand the value of resource development to municipalities and tribal members. These are our shareholders. We were created by Congress and are the largest private landowners in this state, yet our ownership is sometimes disregarded or it's discounted as if our charge is irrelevant to the contribution to the quality of life for the people who we serve. Senator Murkowski and other committee members, as you look to development and national energy policy, please remember that Alaska is an asset for domestic energy production. It's also our home. ASRC appreciates all of your efforts to pursue federal legislation that would address obstacles to sustainable oil and gas development. We also appreciate your steadfast commitment to the challenging issues before us in federal management, land management, regulations, and policies. These have left an uncertainty for developers in this state. ASRC is poised to assist you as you look for proper solutions for these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Appreciate it. And last member on the panel is Mr. Joe Marushak. Welcome.
Thank you, Senator. In the interest of time, I'm going to start about halfway through my written testimony with focus on the federal permitting challenges. Exploration and development in the Arctic, and in particular in Alaska, has its own special set of requirements because of the nature of the land, the tundra, the exploration wells drilled outside of existing infrastructure are drilled in winter using ice roads and ice pads when the tundra is frozen. The ice-based infrastructure melts in the summer and leaves no marks. However, this reduces the amount of time available to drill to about 3 months of the year. When it comes to developing an exploration discovery, the desire to minimize the development footprint requires that we use processes from central production facilities. It requires that we drill wells from central pads using expensive, extended reach drilling. All this leads to costly development and longer time frames for exploration and development for land based outside of the Arctic than it would be for land based outside the Arctic. There are a number of challenging regulatory issues we continue to have with development on federal lands, and I'll summarize several of these. In order for development, conservation, and impact mitigation to proceed orderly in the NPRA, agency decisions must be predictable and reasonably durable. Predictability is essential for developers, residents, investors, the state of Alaska, North Slope Borough, Alaska Native Corps, the tribes, and the villages on the North Slope. Since we first began exploring in the NPRA in 2000, we've seen steadily increasing and evolving requirements from the federal government. At this juncture in time, we have over 250 federal requirements for new developments that must be addressed in NPRA. Again, time prevents me from reading this list to you, but I've included it in an amendment. In an attachment, rather. The steady increase in standards and mitigation measures is complicated by the agencies revisiting previous work, decisions, and compromises. For example, an environmental impact statement that was performed in 2004 that explicitly evaluated and approved roads proposed for the planned development of CD5, GMT1, Moose's Tooth 1, Moose's Tooth 2. However, as permitting for each of these projects has proceeded, we faced additional requirements that were not part of the original project scope, adding time to the schedule, increasing costs, and creating uncertainty regarding the viability of development. It is our belief that the current standards and mitigation measures that we follow in NPRA more than adequately address concerns like potential impacts to the environment and subsistence hunting. We recognize the legitimacy of those concerns, but we feel that they have been well considered and properly addressed. One federal issue that threatens even more uncertainty is the November 2015 White House memorandum calling for the Departments of Defense, Interior, and Agriculture, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and all the bureaus and agencies within them, for example, Bureau of Land Management, Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement, National Park Service, National Marine Fisheries, and Fish and Wildlife Services to develop new impact avoidance and mitigation standards in each of the agency's areas of jurisdiction. This new policy has the potential to upset the balance of protection and development that Congress has directed in the laws under which the agencies operate. From what we have been able to discern, the basis for estimating impacts and associated mitigation measures are not well defined, not predictable, and do not allow us to estimate the effect they may have on the overall economics of oil and gas development. As the agencies provide detail around their plans, assuming there is a public process, we will be submitting comments regarding their concerns. In closing, ConocoPhillips, through its heritage companies Arco Alaska, Phillips Petroleum, and Conoco, has been an active explorer and developer on both federal and state lands in Alaska, both onshore and offshore, from Cook Inlet to the North Slope for over 50 years. We have a track record of environmental and social responsibility operations. Through our investments and those of our other oil and gas companies, we've generated jobs for Alaskans and created wealth for the state of Alaska, Alaska communities, Native regional village corporations, and their shareholders. While we're still very active on state lands, federal lands represent new opportunities to continue supporting the Alaska economy. It's our intent to work with the federal government, residents of the slope, the state of Alaska, and other stakeholders to address concerns such that there is a reasonable regulatory framework guiding oil and gas development on the North Slope lands. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you all for your testimony. Let me ask probably a more general question to each of you to begin the conversation. And Richard, you used the words, Alaska is an asset, Alaska is our home. And when we think about Alaska as the place that we live and work and raise our families, it is important to recognize that we have considerable assets associated with the land, and it's how we access those assets and do so in a way that provides for jobs, provides for a sustainable economy, but also accesses them in a way that ensures that we're good environmental stewards for the land. We want to raise our families in a place as beautiful as your family has lived for generations and generations and generations, and we want to be able to do so going into the future. So from a broader perspective, given the testimony that you each have presented here today, what more can we be doing, should we be doing, to ensure that Alaskans are able to achieve their fullest potential with the resources that we have available to us in our state? Now, Joe, you have mentioned that from Conoco's perspective, regulations hold us back. I think you have suggested, Michelle, that access is a consideration. Can you each, and I don't care who starts off the conversation, but can you each speak to the areas that you feel that Alaskans' potential in accessing our resources is being held back in some way by the federal government, so that we can know better how to help facilitate that? I'll throw that out to whoever would like to begin.
I'll give it a shot.
Okay.
Two areas that your question leads me is has to do with land ownership and federal leasing of federal lands, both in the on and offshore, the terms of leasing, and also the price of delay of even an unapproved project. If it takes multiple years to start from exploration to production, there's a price associated with that. So let's start with that one first. And as you know, in Alaska, most of the resource wealth has been produced from state-owned lands, but there is some, and Michelle alluded to it, there is some production now coming from native-owned lands. And then there's native-owned lands now finally being developed in the National Petroleum Reserve. My point is, if the resource development is of value to native people, and then that project is delayed over multiple years, that represents a real financial impact to native people. We've distributed from the portion of production that is owned by Alaska's native people from the alpine and satellite fields, we've distributed more than $1 billion to all of the regional corporations throughout the state. And yet, if there's some portion of our resource wealth that's made unavailable to us over a period of years, that has a real measurable financial impact to all of Alaska's native regional corporations. So that's the first one, is that there's a cost associated with delay. The second one is that the terms for leasing might be reconsidered. The federal leasing terms should consider a revamp that somehow protects the terms of the leases during this lengthy exploration to production phase. Given our setting, it's remote, it's Arctic, it's sensitive, there's all kinds of reasons for why it should take a measurable and well thought out process from exploration to development. My point is, get rid of the excessive delay and reconsider the terms for federal leasing that somehow takes into account the multi-year phases. It must go even at its most efficient pace from exploration to production.
Thank you. Joe?
Sure.
Mhm.
Sure, thank you. So I picked up on a point when you asked your question, Senator. It's not the regulations that are so problematic. It's the interpretation and the unpredictability of how those regulations are going to be interpreted sometimes. We believe that the regulatory agencies should be following their statutory mandates, not only to protect the environment and subsistence, but also provide a reasonable and balanced path to ensure transparency and predictability in those regulations, and to avoid overlap among the agencies regarding lands that are leased for oil and gas development. And as Richard mentioned, one of the things that we think makes some sense as well is for areas that have been taken off limits for that to be reconsidered. We think that there are some good opportunities for exploration and development. It's kind of amazing that I think that the native corporations and the people on the north and people developing these resources can come to an agreement on how they ought to be developed, but we're precluded by doing that by some of the federal mandates.
Others?
Senator, a couple of thoughts. I've sat on specifically on regulations. I've been on both sides of this fence, both with the Coast Guard, with Pipeline Safety Agency, USDOT, and now with a pipeline operator. I think fundamentally, some of my background, Coast Guard, 35 years ago, it's a different philosophy or approach to regulating an industry to a certain extent. It's complex, you can't dumb it down. But always in the Coast Guard, the goal was never to stop ships from sailing. The goal isn't to tie up the ships. The goal is to have them sail safely, because there's an acknowledgement and a recognition that maritime commerce is important to the economy, the health, the security, and the well-being of this nation. And I don't see that relative to the oil and gas. I think a much more collaborative relationship between the agencies that implement statutes and write regulations, a less prescriptive one, but fundamentally collaborative. I feel strongly some of our best ideas and works, we've got 800 employees, another 600 baseline contractors, thousands of other. They show up every day trying to do a good job at what they do. We're not the enemy of anybody. And I think working with us and with companies is somehow perceived as a conflict. It's very much a command and control regime. It's, can we find you doing something wrong? In the long term, I think that gets you less safety, less reliable performance, more environmental risk than just an upfront, open, collaborative approach to what a regulation might mean to track where Joe is going, and then follow it. I just think I don't see that nearly. So I think that's an opportunity to shape the regulatory regimes in that direction.
Good, thank you. Michelle, anything to add?
Just real briefly, development in our area, just like it is anywhere else, in terms of the federal delays or barriers that you were asking about, it's very hard, it's very challenging to work with individuals or people who are interpreting regulations who've never even been to our area, who don't understand the lay of the land, if you will. So we do a lot of education of these individuals and agencies when they've already scoped out a project or an area, and then coming back to us, the people that live there, and trying to make their project fit where we are at. So just more involvement of local people, landowners from the beginning versus bringing us in at the end, I think would be helpful.
Well, that kind of ties into a follow-on question that I wanted to ask, and this is how we as Alaskans, again, who are choosing to live and work and raise our families here, how we convey to the rest of the country and often to the rest of the world that what we seek to do here is, again, to develop our state's resources and assets, but that we do so with an eye towards the stewardship. And we oftentimes don't get very much credit for the fact that we do have the kind of safety record that you have cited to Admiral Barrett, that we do have a level of care for production up on the North Slope, for instance, the likes of which you do not see anywhere else in the world in terms of the standards that are adhered to. And the question that I would ask, and I'll direct it initially both to you, Richard, and to you, Michelle, is how we kind of keep our minds straight on development and environmental protection. And I'll take you to a quote that the President made when he was up in the state in September. Governor Walker had been urging that he look to expand access for oil and gas development. And the President said, and I'm quoting him here, "One of the ironies when you're up in Alaska, and I mean this sincerely, it shows you that everybody can be two minds about this. I'd have some people say in the same breath, protect this beauty and scenic areas and make sure that nobody is polluting it. And then, oh, and by the way, let's get going on some oil drilling at the same time. I am one of those people that I guess am in the ironic category, because I do support new access and I do support new development, and I don't see the conflict in our ability to protect our lands and to make it available not only for this generation but generations going forward. How do we do a better job? Michelle, you mentioned education. Richard, you have been in the perhaps not so enviable position of being invited back to Washington, D.C. on numerous occasions to come testify. How can we do more? How can we convey the message that it is not ironic, that we want to help our people, and at the same time, we can care for our lands?
Yeah, welcome to our world, right? So the issue at home is stark. I mean, we ask ourselves, who's going to, our grandchildren, what kind of school will they go to? Will there be reliable power in their communities? How will we fund the road maintenance, even snow blowing and ambulance service? Things that the rest of the world takes for granted are present in each of our communities only because of the presence of development in our region. And so we are open about it. We depend on continued development for the survival of our communities. And it's great that we have the ability to hunt in our region, but we don't have a home to come home to if we don't also have development in our region. And so the message or the task becomes, how do you convince the world that there's something between absolute protection, like putting a jar over something and never letting anything in it, and allowing people to live. And the pristineness, mystique of the Arctic will rub off on you and go away pretty fast when you're in survival mode, or when your community's in a survival mode. And the way we've been able to do it at home, I think, is to create alignment. That is, we've invested in development in our region as an owner, a landowner and an equity owner. That way, when there's success for the explorer, there's success for our community's residents. And if we were just victims of development, that's the opposite of the spectrum, the opposite end of it, where we have no ownership, no participation, and we're just victims of negative impacts. We looked at that and decided that the way to create success in our region is to create alignment. The way to create alignment is by investing in the only industry that's been around in our region long enough to pay taxes. We have a bus that fills itself with tourists this time of year. They leave Alaska Airlines, they get on a bus, they drive around the town, they leave the bus, they go in the hotel, they go back in the bus, and then they leave. And it's almost full every day, and we have 3 flights of the jet every day. And yet even that industry can barely supply its own needs as far as tax base. So we recognized our dependence on the oil and gas industry in our region, and we created alignment by investing in it, and we think that is the answer to this we-they syndrome between sitting on the inside and sitting on the outside. We're blessed in our region that it's big. There's room for everything. There's room for everybody. If you look at a map of the North Slope and you look at the infrastructure of oil and gas pipelines, it depends on the width of the ink that they use to draw the map. But you get the impression that there's a spider web full of pipelines. If instead you get dropped off in the middle of nowhere on Alaska's North Slope, you're going to find out that there's a lot of open space, and you'll be thankful for that infrastructure when you do eventually come across it. So there's a lot of room in our region.
Thank you. Michelle?
Thank you for asking. It gives me an opportunity to share Otna's vision, which is our culture unites us, our land sustains us, our people are prosperous. Our people highly prize our land and our food resources, so we're extremely protective over both. We would never jeopardize or compromise the future of our people by standing for irresponsible land development. Our people are born there, they're buried there, that's our home. We would take care of it to the very best of our abilities and protect it. We also, you know, that second line of the vision statement, our land sustains us. While it feeds us and provides us homes, we also believe that our elders selected those lands to take care of us. We are resource rich, and we are very interested in not only developing those resources, but giving our people long-term jobs and careers at home so they don't have to leave the area to work in Anchorage or Fairbanks or wherever. You know, our lands were selected for a reason, and we take very good care of them.
Admiral Barrett, you mentioned that we are at 556,000 barrels of oil moving down the pipeline at this moment. The additional room or capacity is 1.9 million more per day that we could see. If we were to that full capacity in TAPS, what would that mean in terms of additional jobs for Alaskans, and exactly what type of jobs?
Sure. So what it would mean for Alaskans to start with is you'd have to have the development to fill us up, right? So that's thousands of jobs on the exploration and development and all the work that goes with it. But the types of jobs we have in this industry are generally high tech. We've been strong supporters of the Alaska Native Science and Engineering program since its start, as have some of the other people at this table, ANSEP. We need a high-quality, high-talent workforce. It's engineering heavy in the white collar, but it's every skill set. It's accounting, and it's finance, and it's engineering. We are almost 40% blue collar, right? So this is backbone American jobs, but they're instrument techs, they're mechanical techs, they're electricians, they're electrical techs. They are skilled jobs, and they pay good salaries, and they allow people to make a good living. But fundamentally, they're skilled jobs, skilled labor. And the people up here that we have working for us and the people that train them do a fabulous job, and they're very, very good at what they do. But it's a skill set, whether it's blue collar or white collar, and it's all across the board, Senator.
I've got one, let me just ask one more to you, Mr. Maruichak, and then I think we'll move to the next panel. And your testimony has spoken primarily to Conoco's activities there within NPRA, GMT1 and 2, but Conoco is also a leaseholder in our Outer Continental Shelf areas. Have you given much thought to a better leasing and regulatory system that could be implemented in frontier areas in our OCS?
Well, Senator, yes, one thing that has to happen is you have to have lease sales on a fairly regular basis. The last one was 2007. The next one is 2020. It's extraordinarily difficult to do oil and gas development, and when you have 13 years in between those areas, and when so many of the best prospective opportunities are taken off the table. But I'd like to just come back also on that to answer your question on how we can develop these areas responsibly. Having worked all over the world, I can tell you that industry's ability to protect its license to operate is based on safety and environmental performance. And in Alaska, we are I'm very pleased with the amount of safety and environmental performance that we focus on. And then the other thing is our relationship with the native corporations and the people, the owners of the slope, all over the world. This is very, very unique. And so to come back to your question again then, if we can do it in an environmentally and safe process, and if we have the support of the local landowners and the people that live up there, it feels to me like we ought to have opportunities to develop and expand this opportunity on a much more regular basis.
Very good. Last chance, final word from any of the four on the panel.
So can I tell you how
Yes.
much we're operating on, what NPRA?
Yes, go ahead.
NPRA is about the size of the state of Indiana. our developments on CD5, Moose's Tooth 1, Moose's Tooth 2, or 185 acres, 0.0008% of the acreage up there is what we're trying to develop right now.
0.0008% of the NPRA.
185 acres over roughly 24 million acres.
Puts it in context. Admiral Barrett?
You mentioned too about how people can understand that we're able to reconcile these apparently competing interests. I would just ask people to look at our record. I mean, I've been up and down the pipeline now for 5 years. I've seen brown and black bear, caribou, moose, fox, wolves, squirrels, birds. The caribou herd in our region is 4 to 5 times larger than it was before we started development. I think it's our folks are instinctively conservationists. We pay a lot of attention to it, but they value the environment we're in more than anybody else, and they live in it. And I think if you actually look at the record of the pipeline and the development on the slope, the record stands very strong, yet it's largely ignored.
Appreciate that. Michelle?
Thank you, Senator. I guess my last comments on the subject is, come visit us in January, and that's for anyone that feels like they should have a say in terms of what development occurs in our region, or for the agencies that create the regulations that we have to follow. Look at our fuel bills. Look at how our people have to make choices, and I'm not just talking about Ahtna people, I'm talking about people that live in the communities all along the road system. We are not Anchorage, we are not Fairbanks, or some of the larger communities where there are stores and choice and jobs. We're there because we want to be there. That's our home. We want jobs. We want resource development. We want to be able to raise our families there. We don't want any more schools closing. So I would urge people that, before you make a decision for other people, come and live in their situation for a little while and see what it's really like. We find it beautiful. And I think it would be an absolute tragedy for the state if we were to force people to leave their homes to go to bigger cities in order to survive. Rural Alaska is beautiful, and it will continue to remain so long as its people are there.
Well put. Well put. Thank you all. Appreciate it. With that, we will thank our first panel and move to panel number 2. That's a good panel.
I suspect they're each going to be just about that strong. So.
Yeah.
I'll wrangle her.
She was sitting right
She's
here.
right here.
All right. Okay, we will reconvene with our second panel. The panel number 2 is composed of Mr. Bill Jeffress, who is the principal of SRK Consulting. He will be followed by Mr. Jorgensen, Bronk, with the 40 Mile Miners Association. Good to have you with us today. Lorelei Simon, who is the Vice President for Usabelli Coal Mine, is with us, and the panel will be rounded out by Mr. J.P. Tangent, who is an attorney at law here in Fairbanks, and a longtime consultant and knowledgeable person when it comes to our federal lands and particularly mining, so we appreciate that. So again, same kind of contours as far as testimony this afternoon. We'd ask you to keep your comments to about 5 minutes. Your full written statement will be incorporated as part of the record, and once you all have completed, we'll have a chance for a little bit of back and forth with questions. So with that, Mr. Jeffress, if you would like to lead us off. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Bill Jeffress. I'm the Vice President of the Alaska Miners Association, a member of the Alaska Minerals Commission, and principal consultant for SRK Consulting here in Alaska. I've been involved with resource development for over 40 years. Because of the vast difference between Alaska and other states, federal programs do not always adapt to Alaska, even though some of those programs may very well meet the needs of other states. The U.S. Department of Interior agencies such as Bureau of Land Management, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and National Parks control over 201 million acres of the total 365,481,600 acres in Alaska. Over 75% of the federal land in Alaska is closed to mining. That translates into fewer opportunities for jobs. Federal flexibility and state collaboration to balance national policies with local conditions is needed for successful resource development. The state of Alaska and Alaska resource development industries have a long history of successful collaboration with federal and local jurisdictions. Unfortunately, federal land management agencies under this administration are developing guidelines and policies without input from the state of Alaska or resource industries. The most alarming of these issues is that recently BLM's resource management plans for eastern Alaska, Bering Sea, western interior, central Yukon planning areas include massive areas of critical environmental concerns, the ACECs you spoke of earlier, and additional natural research study areas. There are no timelines for completion of studies of these areas prior to lands being available for any type of resource development, if ever. BLM has implemented draft mitigation policies for a project on the North Slope, and BLM Solicitor's Office has rolled out a new interpretation of 43 CFR 3809 regulatory requirements. BLM last Tuesday proposed new reclamation standards for placer miners. BLM has not afforded any opportunities for industry or affected state agencies to participate in the development of these new requirements or policies. Alaska placer miners, whether they are large or just the mom and pop operations, are now required to prepare extensive supplemental plans and baseline documents. The new reclamation standards for Alaska placer miners were developed in the BLM bubble without any consultation with state of Alaska resource agencies that have decades of reclamation and habitat enhancement experience. Collaboration with resource industries and the state of Alaska resource agencies on lessons learned is non-existent. The end result, and some would say the designed result, is the elimination of all placer mining on BLM land. So much for the multiple use concept that was the mantra when I was in college. To further add to the frustration during this downturn in the economy, on November 3rd, 2015, President Obama's memorandum on mitigation has initiated another round of government bureaucratic uncertainty for the resource development industry and a job killer. This memorandum directs the Department of Interior, along with other government entities, to develop mitigation plans based on avoid, minimize, and mitigate, a concept that has been administered by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for decades. If you will indulge me, I'd like to step back in time to the early 1990s. Over 48% of Alaska's surface area, 175 million acres, is wetlands, which is regulated by the Army Corps of Engineers. Under President Bill Clinton's directive and some political persuasion from then Senator Ted Stevens in the form of the Alaska 1% rule, the Corps of Engineers, EPA, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and National Marine Fisheries initiated a 2-year process that resulted in the 1994 Alaska Wetlands Initiative. This document, signed by all parties on May 13, 1994, recognized the unique aspects of Alaska, the limited opportunities for mitigation, and the need for additional flexibility in the Clean Water Act 404 permitting process. Even prior to President Obama's memorandum on mitigation, the Corps of Engineers, through agency consultation during the review and permitting process, considered mitigation options offered by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, EPA, NMFS, and BLM. As a lead agency on most federal permitting activities in Alaska, the Corps of Engineers makes the final determination if provisions of the Clean Water Act are satisfied by avoidance and minimization, or if mitigation would be required, what form of mitigation it will take, such as permitting responsible mitigation, in lieu fees, or compensatory mitigation. The Corps of Engineers review and permitting process using the 1994 Wetlands Initiative as one of the tools to incorporate flexibility where appropriate, although not perfect and without its own hiccups, has provided industry with some certainty. The President's mitigation memorandum removes that certainty and potentially leaves all developers, and especially the extractive resource industries, faced with multiple mitigation requirements. These mitigation requirements not only are on federal land, but private and native corporation land. If Alaska is to develop its natural resources for the good of its citizens and the nation, this governing by command and control must cease. We need to reinitiate collaboration and cooperation for the good of the state and the health of the nation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill. Appreciate it. Mr. Jorgensen, welcome.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the committee for letting me testify on behalf of the mining district today. The 40-mile mining district is currently made up of about 100 miners and was established on the 40-mile bar of the 40-mile river on March 25th, 1898, under the 1866 Mining Act and the 1872 General Mining Act, making the district 118 years old this week. The district is approximately 6,000 square miles and is the oldest and longest standing mining district in the state of Alaska. Since 1898, the district has been actively engaged with governmental agencies to promote family placer mines and create a healthy and vibrant environment for all user groups of the 40-mile watershed. Placer mining in the 40 mile is a clean process, as it is across the state. No acid leaching or other chemicals are used, just water and hard work. The overall footprint is minimal to the extent that the 1986 Environmental Impact Statement showed that collectively all placer mining in the 40-mile district would have no significant impact. The number of acres that the EIS assumed in 1986 would be mined by 1996 hasn't even been reached today, and we're 30 years out. Total all placer activity in the 40 mile is smaller than an Iowa farm. Clearly, gold is a critical part of our society, needed in the assembly of vehicles, computers, cell phones, and all kinds of other necessities. The gold produced by our operations is used for these and other items without the environmental impact caused by other forms of mining. All placer mines in the state are currently facing an unprecedented obstacle in dealing with regulatory agencies like the BLM, EPA, DEC, U.S. Army Corps. In spite of the fact that there is no history of any environmental damage done by any members of our district. We are inundated by instructional memorandas, reinterpretation of regulations, and a complex REM policy for reclamation. BLM has failed to provide adequate funding and staffing for the 3809 mining program, but at the same time has spent hundreds of thousands on the REM policy. On my personal operation, in 5 years, I think I'm on my 6th inspector. The BLM's use of areas of critical environmental concern will close off access and lock up over 700,000 federal acres and essentially landlocking thousands of more acres owned by Doyon and the state of Alaska in the 40-mile region. This will remove any possibility of critical strategic minerals prospecting in the area. The ACECs are also clearly contrary to the No More clause of ANILCA. In 2008, the BLM started a scoping process to replace the individual resource management plans for the 40-mile rivers, White Mountains, and Steese National Conservation Area. The BLM has claimed that they are only amending, consolidating, and updating these resource management plans. This is incorrect. BLM is replacing these plans with the proposed Eastern Interior Management Plan. The current 40-mile rivers management plan was required by and was approved by Congress in 1982. The BLM does have the ability to update the plan, but not replace it, as stated on BLM's website. Sitting in front of me is the old plan. It's underneath the microphone. And the new plan. There is something fundamentally wrong with what is happening when you look at these two piles. The BLM is treating the 40-mile district as if it were an evil entity that needs to be governed with an iron fist. Currently in the 40-mile, BLM will not allow any mining on new claims to be staked because of the withdrawals. This is in direct conflict with the 1872 mining law, which gives citizens of the country the right to mine, and ANILCA specifically granted prior existing rights to the users of the resource and the rights they had. The 40-mile mining district would like it to be positive, and what we need to be doing is helping family placer mining operations. This will help with the economy and strengthen national security. But with the current regulatory scheme, it is tough to be positive. In essence, this boils down to federal overreach that goes against the Statehood Act, ANCSA, and ANILCA. We need to lift the federal land withdrawals so that federal ground is once again, as it was supposed to be, open to mineral staking and prospecting. As a multi-use agency, BLM should be helping to develop placer mines and access to private, native, and state lands, not rolling out hundreds of new pages of regulations, instructional memorandas, and in-house policy. Let's try to work on reducing regulatory paperwork and encourage more people to go out and develop small placer operations. Thank you to the committee and the senator for letting us testify.
Thank you, Bronk. Lorelei Simon, welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Murkowski. I appreciate the invitation to come today and discuss Alaska's coal resources and how our industry is creating Alaska jobs as well as playing a vital role in strengthening our national security. USABELI is celebrating our 73rd year of operation this year. We proudly supply 100% of the in-state demand to 6 coal-burning power plants, and we have a long history of exporting coal on the international market. Today, USABELI employs about 108 people. The average wage paid to our employees is more than double the average wage in Alaska. USABELI's operations directly provide about 20% of private sector employment for Healy's year-round residents. The McDowell Group produced a report that was based on 2013 data on the socioeconomic impacts of USABELI coal mine. There were 640 direct, indirect, induced, and coal-fired power plant jobs, which equated to nearly $49 million in wages. Usabelli spent close to $41 million with Alaska businesses and made up 20% of the Alaska Railroad Corporation's freight revenue. Coal is interior Alaska's lowest cost source of energy and accounts for nearly 1/3 of electrical energy generation. In the absence of Usabelli coal, energy costs in interior Alaska would be much higher, perhaps 25% higher than they are today, a cost of approximately $200 million annually. Fort Wainwright and Eielson Air Force Base spend about $33 million a year on coal purchases. If trucked natural gas from the North Slope becomes available, the bases could switch to natural gas, but their energy costs would triple. Let us not forget that natural gas is not available to the military today, nor is it available to interior Alaska. Military spending is estimated to support 30% of the Fairbanks economy. Large increases in energy costs could risk maintaining the military's presence in the interior. On another note, Senator, we certainly cannot deny the reality that unnecessary government regulation is taking its toll on our industry. Primarily, we are deeply concerned about the proposed federal stream protection rule. If this proposed rule becomes final, it will likely kill coal development in Alaska. The stream protection rule represents a complete rewrite of the 1977 Surface Coal Mine Control and Reclamation Act, which we call SMACRA. It is not a simple revision. Congress passed SMACRA, yet today we are seeing unelected federal bureaucrats violate legislative intent, which will kill America's coal industry. The proposed stream protection rule is a violation of states' rights. It unlawfully seizes the regional discretion granted in SMACRA, and it overthrows state primacy. Senator, I don't need to tell you how unique the geology is on the North Slope versus Southeast Alaska. The stream protection rule targets coal mining in Appalachia, yet it is being smeared across the entire country all the way to Alaska. Alaska was not considered nor consulted in the drafting of the proposed rule. No scientific studies relevant to Alaska are referenced in the documentation, and no public meetings were held here. Of greatest concern to us is that we only had 91 days to review over 3,000 pages of documents, all of which took OSM over 6 years to produce. Yet industry, state agencies, and stakeholders had only 91 days to review. In summary, I do not believe that the proposed stream protection rule can be fixed enough to be palatable. I believe the entire proposed rule should be thrown out and the agency should begin again, this time with proper consultation with the states. Since it is unlikely that the administration will take such action, a very simple solution would be the passage of the STREAM Act. Madam Chair, Usabelli Coal Mine respectfully requests the committee to pass S 1458, Senator Coates' bill. This bill will require the Secretary of Interior to make publicly available all data relied on for new regulations, environmental impact statements, as well as environmental and economic assessments. This bill will also ensure that the Secretary does not needlessly duplicate or encroach upon environmental laws under the jurisdiction of other agencies. The bill will encourage a transparent rulemaking and guarantee that the proposed SPR, Stream Protection Rule, does not add needless regulation. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you. And last, we will go to Mr. J.P. Tangent. Welcome.
Thank you, Senator. I appear today on behalf of 1,800 members of the Alaska Miners Association. I believe that it goes without saying that the very existence of the state of Alaska is dependent upon the development of its abundant natural resources. Many of the resources needed for our national security are found in Alaska as well. No one can seriously argue that Alaska, though, is not unique in many ways, not the least of which is the abundance and diversity of its mineral resources that are found from one end of the state to the other. The Alaska statutory trilogy repeatedly has recognized that abundance. First, the Statehood Act granted to the state 104 million acres of land selections. This is an area greater in size than the entire state of California. The justification for such a significant grant was that due to our size, remoteness, and sparse population, Alaskans would need vast tracts of resource-rich land to develop and support its residents. Second, the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, in settling long-standing land claims, afforded indigenous people a commercial paradigm for generating cash revenue independent of the public treasury. The settlement included 44 million acres in land selections, which selections frequently were made with an eye toward resource development. And third, the Alaska National Interest Lands Conservation Act was adopted to ensure that distinguished park areas, refuges, rivers, and representative woodlands were afforded unique consideration without adversely impacting existing opportunities to develop the resources of the state. The Alaska statutory trilogy was adopted in the context of the respective contemporaneous organic mandates of the 4 major land managing agencies in Alaska. Accordingly, ANILCA, for instance, was consented to and adopted based upon the practices of the 4 agencies as they were interpreted in 1980. 35 years later, these agencies have aggressively evolved in ways that deny the people of Alaska their expressly intended benefits. When adopted, ANILCA created numerous conservation systems which frequently surrounded privately held inholdings and allotments, which were transected by trails and waterways customarily used for access through and across the subsumed areas. Since passage, the National Park Service, the Fish and Wildlife Service, and the U.S. Forest Service have all imposed restrictions vitiating the utility of these holdings and access routes. At this time, the Alaska Miners Association is calling for a corrective legislative action, either in the form of a standalone bill or as amendments to other germane legislation to accomplish at least the following goals. First, the organic acts of the 4 major land management agencies need to be amended to harmonize their requirements with the Alaska statutory trilogy. And I refer you to the express language of the Supreme Court of the United States in the Sturgeon versus Frost case, which went on at great length to talk about how those two groups of statutes should be harmonized. Second, as a priority, ANILCA needs to be amended to provide a clear, Alaska-specific definition of what constitutes a withdrawal in connection with land management plans in Alaska. Third, the Alaska Land Use Council, which was created by Title 12 of ANILCA to facilitate coordination between the state and of Alaska and the 4 federal land management agencies, needs to be reconstituted to ensure that the 4 land management agencies have adequate oversight with regard to Alaska-specific land management activities. Fourth, public land orders that have been recommended to the Secretary for revocation have not been acted on. They should be revoked by statutory action now. Fifth, RS 2477 rights-of-way need to be conveyed to the state by statute. RS 2744 is self-enacting. It does not require any action by the Department of the Interior or by anybody else, and certainly not to be processed through the Quiet Title Act. And so those grants should be implemented right away. The state of Alaska has identified a bunch of those RS 2477s, and those identified RS 2477s, which are found at AS 1930.400, should be now granted by statute, including a 50-foot on either side of the center line description and provisions for adequate borrow pits. And 6, the submerged land in Alaska, which belong to Alaska according to the Statehood Act, should also be recognized by statute. We got those submerged lands at the time of the Statehood Act, but the Department of the Interior has resisted the conveyance because of the definition of what constitutes navigable waters. There has been already some law that's been developed in that case, on that matter, and essentially what The definition that's been agreed to, at least in one instance, is a body of water that would float a raft which contains a 1,000-pound load. That's a perfectly good definition, and that ought to be in statute. If it can support a 1,000-pound load on water in Alaska, it ought to be deemed navigable, period, end of story. Madam Chairman, this concludes the recommendations of the Alaska Miners Association at this time. We appreciate the opportunity to present these requests to you, and we stand ready to assist in your efforts to ensure that Alaska's mining industry remains strong for the benefit of the state and for the security of the nation.
Thank you, Mr. Tanchin, and I appreciate the very concrete proposals here, and there'll be a springboard for conversation here. The last panel, I asked kind of a general question to each of those who were present about areas that we might look to that are currently holding us back as Alaskans in accessing our resources. So that panel was focused on oil and gas opportunities and access for our lands. We're now looking at mining and recognizing the amazing potential that we have in Alaska for the elements that are buried under the earth here. And while we have a lot of focus on coal coming out of Usabelli, gold coming out of the 40-mile district, our reality is that here in Alaska, our mineral resources are extraordinary, world-class potential in many areas. And while we think about the vulnerability that we had as a nation when we were so heavily reliant on imports for oil, coming in from nations that didn't really like us, and we always talked about that great vulnerability. Well, that has changed dramatically as we have figured out how to access more of our oil and natural gas potential. But our reality is that when it comes to our minerals, we are moving in the same direction that we were with oil and natural gas, being more and more reliant on others for elements that are necessary and critical to our daily lives. You know, I'm wandering around with a smartphone. You are. Any one of us that want to support and move out on renewable energy sources, if you're interested in more wind turbines, you've got to have those components that go into the component pieces of that wind energy turbine. So focusing on minerals and mining, I think, is not only important from a jobs and access to resources perspective, but it's also important from that security perspective, and that was, I think, your final line there, Mr. Tanchin. So the question to each of you, in addition to what you have already mentioned, concerns about the mitigation proposal, concerns about the stream buffer rule, concerns about what we're seeing with ACECs and these kind of pseudo withdrawals, how can we be doing more to allow Alaska the opportunity to achieve its full potential when accessing our mineral resources? It was Mr. Marushak who said it's not so much the regulations, it's the interpretation and the unpredictability of the regulations. Do you agree with that, or is it the regulations? So if we can just kind of start the conversation off this way, and Mr. Jeffress, we'll begin with you.
I think Joe was absolutely correct on this, and one of the things that we have seen is the regulations, industry can adapt to the regulations, but it's this never-changing reinterpretation. One of the biggest issues is the fact that objectivity in the regulatory agencies is a thing of the past. We have this subjective climate where individual biologists can nominate ACECs, and the group that reviews that nomination are his peers within the agencies. I mean, there's other criteria on the Corps of Engineers, not to pick on them, but with some of the other cooperating agencies, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, National Marine Fisheries, the objectivity is a thing of the past. And it's very frustrating because I originally came to Alaska to permit the Fort Knox mine, and It was 10 years from discovery to production. That's a thing of the past right now too. And a lot of it isn't because the regulations have changed, it's because the interpretation of those regulations have changed.
Bronk, you agree with that?
I would agree with that when we just look at these two piles, the old ones and what's being proposed, especially from a small operation. When you have big companies saying they can't keep up, how is a family operation supposed to keep up with reading this?
Can you speak to that a moment? Because in your written testimony, you kind of allude to the one size fits all, and it doesn't make a difference if it's a mom and pop placer miner operation on the 40 Mile or whether it is a large scale mining effort, that basically it is a one size fits all approach.
Correct, and it's also all 50 states approach fits all. I think the Sturgeon case made a good point that Alaska is unique and different. And, you know, ANILCA was supposed to help us with that. There's also a law called the Federal Regulatory Act, I believe, Management Act, which agencies are supposed to look at how these regulations will affect small operators compared to small operators. For the most part, that's not being done, but it is required. So they need to be looking at both sides, but they're not. When you look at federal mining claims in Alaska, in the 40 Mile, since withdrawals have taken place in the 40 Mile, there's been no open staking. At the time of withdrawal, all valid claims that had discovery were valid and could be mined. Now BLM, if you want to change your plan or go mine a claim that doesn't have an old plan, they're going to require you to do a mineral validity exam, about $60,000 a claim. So, and if they don't deem that there's enough mineral there by their opinion, they're going to take it away and you lose the claim. And that's wrong. You know, when the withdrawals took place and the scenic river corridors went around existing valid claims, but BLM is blanketed over. So the expense, the government can contest the claim if they don't believe it's valid, but they have to pay for it, not the individual miner. And this is becoming a big issue with reclamation also. Our plans, most plans have an acreage limit. You mine some ground, you keep going up the creek, you reclaim the background. If BLM won't sign off on your reclamation, you eventually run out of acres and you're out of business. You're gonna have to wait until, in essence, the willows grow. If you look at creeks that have been mined, you know, you can see that stuff is gonna grow, you can see that it's gonna happen, but BLM at this point is developing this new REM policy. They spent a bunch of money on Jack Wade Creek developing it. And this isn't regulation, this is just in-house policy that's come about with instructional memorandas. A few weeks ago, they just released that now they're doing revegetation standards also.
So it's not just the regulation, it's not just statute, it is guidance, it is guidelines that effectively come up and
Correct.
grab you
Instructional
from behind.
memorandas are, the way we see it, is BLM employees have to follow those policies. It's not the law, we don't have to follow it. But yet, that's the policy, so they won't sign off on reclamation work. When I asked for reclamation on Franklin Gulch to be signed off on, it took 2 years for a response. Part was granted, part was not. And there's no definite time periods, there's nothing. BLM stated that the Wade demonstration project would not be used as a policy and a standard. Yesterday, I was given a decision BLM issued on some other reclamation for another miner in the 40 Mile that specifically referenced the Wade reclamation job as to how it should be done.
Yeah, they told us it was not going to be used that way.
Correct.
Let me ask you, Lorelei, you're coming from a company that's 73, close to 75 years old in operation, a bigger mining, but same set of concerns when it comes to the interpretation of the regulations, but you've also cited very specifically that the stream protection rule is a rule that would effectively wipe out Usabelli's operation or mining in Alaska, I think were your words.
Yeah, I mean, truly, it's a mess out there. And I mean the federal regulatory world. It is true that in order for any of us to do our jobs, we need a stable regulatory environment. We just want to know what the rules are so that we can play by the rules. But the problem is that you have Congress who enacts legislation, and then you have these agencies who are, in essence, rewriting the rules of the game, in our opinion, unlawfully. And so it makes it very difficult for our industry to survive when there is so much uncertainty. And it really is becoming just death by 1,000 cuts. I forget what the figure is, but in the first few years of this administration, there were more federal regulations passed than all of the history of the United States combined. I mean, it just became an absolute onslaught of a new way of creating the business environment in this country. And so, you know, I talked about the stream protection rule. That's certainly under your committee's purview, but also the waters of the United States. Everybody in this room should be concerned about that. It will affect every single development project in this country, not just mining, but construction, your personal home construction, large construction projects, the oil and gas industry. And so we certainly appreciate your attention to that. That's something that you've worked on quite hard on. But yeah, I mean, really, it's just an onslaught every day of what's coming next. And again, it isn't this process, a public process where elected officials are creating new rules. You know, I'm quite confident this didn't come across your desk for a signature, right? So this isn't being reviewed by our elected officials. It's being created.
JP, you want to weigh in here?
Yes, Senator, I think I hope to weigh in with a proposal that may be at least a partial solution. And that goes to the point that I made in my testimony, though, and that is that the Alaska Land Use Council should be reconstituted. I remind you that in 1980, when ANILCA was passed, Section 1201 set up the Alaska Land Use Council, and it was consisting of the federal land managing agencies plus the representative of the President of the United States, one of the co-chairmen, and the state counterparts of each of these agencies, plus the governor of Alaska as the other co-chairman. It was in 1201. It was provided that the Land Use Council would be reconsidered in 1990, and in 1990, the Land Use Council unanimously recommended to your committee, this committee, that the Land Use Council be not sunsetted. Nonetheless, this committee and the Senate, Congress of the United States elected to allow it to disappear. Now, the Land Use Council essentially was a forum for coordinating the impact of regulations by the federal land management agencies with the needs of the state of Alaska. And it was an opportunity for us we in Alaska, to have a voice in what was going to happen. And regulations and recommendations and activities that impacted federal lands had to be agreed to by the council. We need to reinstate that council. It's a priority. And I think that it would go a long way in addressing many of the issues that were addressed today. At least we would have state input at a significant level on some of these regulations. These regulatory burdens, I mean, Broncos and Bill and others have made the point. They're outrageous, absolutely outrageous. I have clients across my office who couldn't possibly begin to move the first yard of gravel on a mom-and-pop possum mining operation if they had to sit down and read every word of the regulatory requirements that impact them. It literally is putting my clients and other people like them out of business.
Well, and I would certainly agree that when you think about those that are just out there on the creek trying to make a living, they are not going home at the end of a long, hard day and sifting through these regs or the CFRs to see what is coming their way. And I also think that from the agency perspective, and we don't have anyone from the agencies that are testifying today, we'll have an opportunity for that hopefully at another hearing, but just in terms of what is now being required of your placer miners out there, Ms. Bronk, whether or not BLM has the resources, the technical expertise to review and to issue all of these placer miner permits in a timely manner. So you've got, on the one hand, the miner not being able to keep up with it, but you also have the agency that has now put on themselves all this additional work. They can't get to it, so it slows you up, and you get to what Lorelei has said, a mess, just a general mess. I want to ask each of you about this presidential memorandum on mitigation. We held a hearing in the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee. We held a hearing, it was a couple, 3 weeks ago now, and got good insight and testimony on that. The concern that has been raised is that this is not just something that will impact our public lands. And I think it was you, Bill, that mentioned that it will affect development on private lands, on our native corporation lands as well. Can any of you speculate what these additional mitigation requirements might do? We all recognize that the uncertainty that it brings, but what might this do to the investment climate? Because it's pretty tough to get out there and engage in much beyond a very, very small operation if there is no investment for your operation. What do you think that this is going to be doing to the investment climate? Bill?
I think that the first of all, the uncertainty even with the Corps of Engineers right now with compensatory mitigation, until they put the 1994 Wetlands Initiative, Alaska Wetlands Initiative back in the toolbox, there was tremendous uncertainty on what it was going to cost. That, you have to figure that into the economics of your project. And what this adds now is that every one of the federal agencies named in the memorandum that has any part in an authorization or issuing a permit can now issue or demand additional mitigation. And whether that's whether avoidance and minimization takes care of that problem, most unlikely that it won't. We've seen some of the threatened and endangered species where they've taken large land areas in the lower 48 with the sage-grouse. And we have the same potential of this happening up here. What's critical on this is the Corps of Engineers met the intent of Congress with the Clean Water Act and potential mitigation. Now you have all these other agencies jumping on top of it, and their regulations aren't written yet. We don't know what their programs are going to be. Would you invest in a project in Alaska with that much uncertainty? It is scary for us. This is a perfect storm between low oil prices, low metal prices, a timber industry that's non-existent anymore.
Have any of the agencies that are outlined in the memorandum, have they released any statements? Have they communicated in any way with how they will either implement or enforce any of the mitigation requirements? Has there been any back and forth, any engagement with the agencies on this mitigation memorandum?
The only feedback that I've had personally is that the draft mitigation policy that Bureau of Land Management has implemented as a draft is the template for the other agencies to use, which scares the hell out of me.
But you didn't, there was no input to
No.
BLM from anybody here in Alaska. Lorelei?
No, I don't think so, but it's also important to remember how much of Alaska is already under federal jurisdiction.
Right.
And so to try to find land available for compensatory mitigation is going to get increasingly more difficult. And so that right there is an excellent answer to your question of what does it do to the investment climate? Again, it's just an enormous amount of uncertainty.
And one of the clear things that we heard in the testimony before the full committee was that you have different agencies with an interpretation as to different terminology, different implementation, different standards, and again, just further uncertainty and really outright contradiction at times. I wanted to ask, and this is probably best to you, Lorelei, regarding the federal-state relationship. Can you give me your view on the relationship between the Office of Surface Mining, Reclamation, Enforcement, and the state of Alaska? Because the concern that I have here is that we've got our state operation, and we have Interior over here, and what is happening at the state level is basically being smothered.
So off the record, I may have a different answer for you, Senator. But on the record, I would say that the state of Alaska has been very strong, particularly on WOTUS as well as on the SPR. The previous Parnell administration, as well as Governor Walker, they have been very strong on trying to stand up for states' rights. And personally, with the coal program and the stream protection rule, this very small division within the Department of Natural Resources has an amazing resource talent in their people. And they have been able to help a lot of us miners better understand even the stream protection rule at the scientific level. And so with that kind of support, I see it working properly in that the people who are on the ground, you know, the coal program manager, his direct reports, who are the investigators for our mine, they have been working with OSM to try to break down the rule and really explain how it just does not work in Alaska. Again, this one-size-fits-all approach, what may work fine in Appalachia just does not work in Alaska. For example, we cannot collect 12 months of water samples, right? Because, ladies and gentlemen, it's frozen. Yeah, and so like that type of thing, or even this nullification clause of at any point, at any time, OSM could come in and just decide that the permit is not valid and pull our permit. Well, this could be 5, 10, 15, 35 years after we've been mining under this permit. And so then we would be held liable for basically operating illegally up to that point of when they deemed the permit nullified. And so that type of uncertainty, you're like, well, how could that possibly even work? I mean, whose idea was this? So yes, I guess my short answer to your question is I believe the state of Alaska is standing very strong in their working relationship with OSM, particularly on the stream protection rule.
Last question is directed to you, Mr. Tangent, and you raised the Sturgeon case that we just saw the Supreme Court come out, kick it back to the 9th, but some good, strong language in that case that recognized the role of ANILCA and the balance that is found in NILCA. I guess I'm going to ask you to speculate a little bit about how the Sturgeon decision can affect the issues that we're talking about here today with regards to accessing our resources. You've outlined some specific proposals for the committee to consider, but given the direction that we saw kind of laid down by the court, how do you feel that this will impact us, if at all?
Yeah, one has to speculate, obviously, but I think that if one reads the last few pages of the Sturgeon opinion, and I recommend the opinion to everybody who is interested in the subject, because it's not very long, but it's very powerful. The last few pages of the Sturgeon opinion, among other things, in the remand to the Ninth Circuit, calls the Ninth Circuit's interpretation topsy-turvy. And I think that says a mouthful, because to the extent that 8 justices in the Supreme Court, in a unanimous court, signed off on that opinion and that language, then that has to be a mandate to the federal district judges in Alaska that they need to take another look when they are interpreting the land managing organic acts, when they're charged with that essential responsibility. They have got to look at the implementation of the land management acts, whether it's using a hovercraft in the Nation River, or almost any other question that comes up. And these questions of access and whether something is a withdrawal, et cetera, come up on a fairly regular basis in the courts of this state. They have got to take another look at it, almost to ensure that these interpretations are viewed through the prism of what I've referred to as the Alaska Statutory Trilogy. It's an important giant step forward. I guess maybe I'm more than a little bit optimistic by suggesting that the agencies and the federal district courts will follow the clear guidance of the United States Supreme Court. But hope springs eternal. So.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. So with the first panel and the second, we've been talking about our resources in the ground, oil and gas and coal and mining. And this third panel that we will tune to now is related to that human resource and the potential. But I've just listened to a couple of the examples that have been presented today in terms of the size of how or what we access. You mentioned, Bronk, that the placer mining within the 40-mile district, the oldest district, 118 years. When you bring it all together, it's about the size of an Iowa farm. When we talk about the area in ANWR that we would like to be able to develop, one of the analogies that we use is the size of Dulles Airport right outside of Washington, D.C. Joe Marushak mentioned that within all of the NPRA, it's 0.0008%. Within the Tongass National Forest, our largest national forest, the fact that with all of the decades of harvesting within that forest, the percent that has actually been harvested in forested areas is still hovering right around 4%. So when you think about our state, the size, the scope, the assets that we have, and what it is that we're trying to access, it really is, it's really pretty small standards. But we recognize that even if it is just these small areas, we still access them responsibly and with a care for that environmental stewardship. So we will now turn to our third panel to discuss the human resources, and that is our Alaskan workforce. So thank you, panel number 2.
So Michelle is over here on the right-hand side, by the way.
right. We are back with our third and final panel. And as I mentioned, this is a panel to look at all of our human resources and the job that is underway to ensure that as we access Alaska's resources for the benefit of Alaskans, that we have trained and a skilled workforce. The panel this afternoon will be led off by Vince Beltrami, who is the president of the Alaska AFL-CIO. Thank you for being here. He will be followed by Lisa Herbert, who is the president and CEO for the Greater Fairbanks Chamber of Commerce. Lisa's not having to travel very far, but having to travel even a shorter distance is Chad Hutchison, who is the head of the Pipeline Training Center. Again, thank you for opening your doors to us all here today. And Kevin Pomeroy will wrap up the panel. Kevin is the business manager for Laborers Local 942. So thank you to all of you for being here and for joining us, and we will begin with Mr. Beltrami. Go ahead, Vince.
Great. Thank you, Senator, and thank you for the invitation to be here. I did submit some prepared written testimony, but as I've listened to the discussion here this morning, it's kind of shifted what I thought I would focus on a little bit, so that means I might ad-lib a little and hopefully can stay within my 5 minutes. But the part about what we do in terms of training and how that, maybe I'll be able to circle back to that before we're done. But I wanted to start off with something you mentioned earlier in response to the President's visit when you said that I would say consider me part of Team Ironic also. We believe that you can do responsible resource development and be conservationist at the same time. And we have a many years record of doing that in the state of Alaska. The Arctic is basically, Alaska is always called the last frontier. I think the Arctic is kind of that final frontier that we have to look at with more potential economic benefit to Alaska, Alaskans, and to the federal government. Actually, if we could work on what I heard were the huge challenges of the previous two panels on making sure that permitting is streamlined and that processes work so that we can put Alaskans to work. Resource jobs have meant a huge amount to Alaskans, particularly to the members that I represent. We have about 60,000 members in the state. About half of those come out of the building trades, and a big chunk of those learned, I should say, most of their training many years ago on the initial construction of the Trans-Alaska Pipeline System. It was a big, probably the largest job constructed in North America. It was done under a project labor agreement, meaning that it was done in connection with the best training systems that exist for building trades folks in the world, and I think that's our joint apprenticeship and training committees that we have. But a generation of workers were trained on that job and on other jobs, and those folks are retiring in droves right now. And the one thing that I kind of wanted to shift to on my testimony that's not in what I submitted was that what the state is facing in terms of challenges financially. I've been going around the state doing other presentations dealing with the state budget, and up until about a year ago or so, 90% of the state's revenues came from what flowed through that pipe. Right now, of course, we're experiencing a huge downturn in those prices, and the oil industry is only providing about 20% of the revenue needed to balance our budget at the budget that passed last year. So the opportunities that exist aren't going to be coming from the state's coffers right now. We just had the smallest state capital budget in the last 15 years last year. And that was only what we had to put up to meet the federal match requirements. So we don't have the $2 to $3 billion budgets that we've had over the past several years as a result of oil and gas exploration development and what's flowed through the pipe. But now we have an opportunity. We have to look forward to infrastructure development in the Arctic, on oil and gas, natural resources, infrastructure, like some of the things that if we want to do, the Arctic is going to be that next. We already have everybody heading up there. Russia's heading over there. Everyone's heading to the Arctic and staking their claim, and we have to be prepared to do that. And not only do we need to do more responsible resource development, we've got to build infrastructure. I mentioned to you when I saw in the airport, I want to see a Coast Guard base built. We need to have a deep water port that can handle that maritime commerce that Admiral Barrett spoke to earlier today. There's all kinds of opportunities, and most of them are going to be in the Arctic. And that's where we think the greatest potential for economic stimulation exists. So to speak just specifically to what we do and how we train in the union-based apprenticeship programs, we've been doing it in the state for about 70-plus years. We spend, and we mostly pay for that ourselves. There's $11 million a year, roughly, that we have negotiated. That's union employers with the union sitting at a table, negotiating contributions that go towards funding our training programs, somewhere usually between 75 cents and $2 an hour out of the wage and benefit package goes in to raise that money to pay for our students, to get them educated, to get them in hands-on training and classroom training and everything that goes along with creating a real skilled craftspeople. And we have over $30 million in infrastructure in the state, not including this facility, which actually my predecessor, Jim Sampson, talked me into taking this job so that he could come here and build this facility. And just a little while ago, before we started, I was sitting in one of the classrooms just going over notes and stuff and just looking around in there at all the personal protective equipment, the gear, the safety stuff, and thinking, I sure hope we can fill these classrooms with Alaskans, because we are positioned to do this, to partner with our union-based apprenticeship programs and anyone else that wants to come to the table. And I think the Pipeline Training Center is a great example of where we work with our union-based apprenticeship programs, but also with the university and places like AvTech and things like that. There's a great training infrastructure, I think, built in Alaska. We have the ability to ramp up our training as we need, or ramp it down as the economy dictates. However, we don't want to end up where we ended up back in the mid to late 80s. We built the pipeline, and then we went into a recession, and we lost tons of folks that we had trained to do that work who left. Luckily, there was a lot of work that's come up through the 90s and into the 2000s that have been a lot of work that has been vibrant, kept our members working. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges. We know that these investments in the Arctic that we're looking at, whether it's gas lines or pipelines or ports or Coast Guard bases or any of those things, they take several years to get going. We're at a time in this state's financial picture where we don't have the state able to provide projects to get people trained for those projects that will be getting started, the big projects a few years down the road. And so it's a real critical time that we look at whether it's GO bonds for the state to get projects on the books that we can train people on, whether it's federal spending, whether it's private investment spending. We stand ready to work with all comers and making sure that we can meet the need as we've been able to demonstrate that we've been able to do over the last several decades in the state. So thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to any follow-up questions.
Thank you, Vince. Lisa Herbert, thank you for being here.
Yeah, good afternoon. So as you said, I'm the president and CEO of the Fairbanks Chamber of Commerce. We're a business advocacy organization currently representing over 750 businesses right now, all shapes, all sizes, all industries, and they employ thousands of hardworking Alaskans. While we tend to focus on local and state policies, we are mindful of the federal impact to the interior, and Alaskans are both interested and adept at opportunities to responsibly develop those natural resources that are essential to maintaining and growing our sustainable economy. However, history has shown when government interferes in decisions or jobs best completed by the private sector, or imposes rules or regulations that are technologically and economically infeasible to implement, those opportunities are squandered, and as a result, Alaskans suffer. While some of the laws and regulations have been formed with good intentions, their reach and complexity have extended to the absurd. My written comments are much more in-depth here. I want to thank some of the members that helped frame some of my comments here today. I don't serve in any of those industries, but we have lots of members that benefit through the work of resource development here in the way of indirect jobs. And so allowing them to kind of provide some comments for me to be able to pass along to you is really important. So thanks for that opportunity. So a few of the comments that I had received from my members, just to put on the record, painful examples that have stymied our economic development here, include additional wetlands, delineation and constraints, particularly where much of Alaska is underlain by permafrost. And as Lorelei commented, rules that work across the United States may not work here in Alaska. The excessive requirements and evaluation procedures imposed when performing environmental impact statements have reached beyond the original statutory language and intentions, and the EPA's preemptive veto for the Pebble project before permitting process had commenced on state land. The new BLM revegetation and wildlife habitat standards are anticipated to dramatically increase the effort and complications of work necessary to close out mining claims on federal lands. And as was mentioned, this process was recently disclosed but developed to the point of approval without any involvement or input from the agencies in Alaska or the general public. The unduly frequent violations of the federal state compact, ANILCA, and just as the recent Sturgeon v. Frost case by the Supreme Court indicate that the federal government has gone too far. OSHA's proposed silica standards for the construction industry will cost more than originally estimated and will therefore translate into significant job losses for this industry and the broader economy, impacting many of our chamber members in the supply and equipment businesses as well as those in the non-construction sector. One of our members highlighted that they have spent over 6 years in administrative and court procedures before they were able to get a final ruling on whether or not the Army Corps had jurisdiction over the development of the land they owned off Van Horn Road. Ultimately, though, after years of litigation, they were able to proceed once the courts ruled in their favor, but at a great cost to them. As was mentioned earlier, we're facing unprecedented low oil throughput in taps, and even worse, a drastic drop in the price per barrel of oil has dramatically affected our state's budget. There's significant amount of oil that is yet to be produced, but due to delays in government and this has significantly impacted investment here in Alaska. Example, including the permitting delays experienced by ConocoPhillips CD5 and GMT project. If that project had not been delayed, our pipe yards and welding shops would have full parking lots of people. Our supply stores would be fulfilling orders, and we'd have trucking companies hauling loads of freight up and down the roads, but instead we're sitting here waiting and we've just been told no. I do think it's ironic that in a time when our economy is starving for work, our government continues to delay forward progress. Certainly resolving the high cost of energy is high on our priority list, has been for a long time. However, the EPA's Clean Power Plan will continue to be problematic for Alaska, and the evident thesis of dirty coal standards stands contrary to the practical realities of our interior electrical energy generation. The substantially increased requirements and rules of the recent Stream Protection Rule magnifies and further complicates the coal mining we need in Alaska to produce our power. In short, the invention and imposition of many new requirements and federally administrated rules are in fact a steady shift away from state sovereignty and economic resource development. Business members are being told no, and the finding that federal government seems to be more and more restrictive in their issuance of permits. Our state's facing some real economic hard times right now. Over the last 8 years, Fairbanks has missed out on a lot of local private investment simply because agencies are unwilling to apply common sense, real-world scenarios, or objective determinations, and our lack of natural gas here in the interior has really stymied some major private investment from some large corporations. But what the agencies always seem to fail to understand, especially here in Alaska, is that time really is money. Every delay usually means an entire season is lost out due to our construction seasons, and the mitigation costs usually are enough to kill the project, if not significantly delay them. The margins for many businesses in this community are thin, but they are willing to stay here, they're willing to invest, and they're committed to Alaska. Today on this panel, we've got business and labor represented, and I think we're all just here asking for the opportunity to stay in business, get back to work, and be assured that we're allowed to proceed making investments that make sense here in Alaska with some sort of certainty. We're a vital business community. We're dedicated to Alaska and its future, and I want to thank you again for the opportunity to represent the voice of business here today.
Thank you, Lisa. Appreciate it. Chad Hutchison.
Thank you, Senator. I'd like to start out, provide a brief overview of my background. I'm a 25-year member of the Operating Engineers Local 302. I'm also a graduate of Local 302's Apprenticeship and Training Program. I spent the first 15 winters of my career on Alaska's North Slope working for Crowley Maritime's Division CATCO, supporting Alaska's producers in exploration all across the North Slope's oil reserves and gas reserves. I've been from Camden Bay to Prudhoe Bay, the foothills of the Brooks Range. In 2006, I became the Alaska Operating Engineers Apprenticeship and Training Coordinator for the Northern Region. In 2015, I was fortunate enough to be hired as the Director of the Fairbanks Pipeline Training Center. Our mission at the Fairbanks Pipeline Training Center is to train and develop Alaska's oil and gas mining construction workforce. The training center is a fully integrated facility and provides classroom and hands-on training in the disciplines of cross-country pipeline training, building and trades, Process Tech, which is delivered by the University of Fairbanks Community and Technical College. We collaborate with our training partners to deliver training to apprentices, high school, and college students, transitioning military personnel and vets, and students from Alaska's numerous rural communities. The training center also has a linkage agreement with the Fairbanks North Star School District, the APJCC, and other educational and training providers to execute workplace safety and on-the-job training, with the specific goal of training the next generation of Alaska's oil and gas mining and construction workforce, with an emphasis on legacy jobs. I would also like to mention that none of this could be possible without our partners, oil industry partners, labor, state, federal government, as well as industry. We've all come together to make this training center a reality. With so many people talking about the development of a natural gas pipeline coming together, partnerships, the cost of the pipeline, the challenges that lay ahead in these economic times, my concern is who's going to build it? Where are these people at? To have a skilled, productive, and safe workforce takes years to develop. Young people starting in apprenticeship programs today will just be moving on to journeyman careers in 4 to 5 years. It can take another 5 to 10 years before they have the skill and experience they need to move into leadership roles if the opportunities are there. We have 2 work seasons in Alaska, summer and winter. Both can be a very short time to gain the experience needed to move into these positions. In the oil and gas mining industry, there is no single 4-week class that will give you everything you need to know in a career, in these careers. It is the time in a classroom and on the job that creates a safe, skilled, experienced workforce, safe being a key factor. Workforce development and career exploration now will determine the success of a gas line in the years to come. Excuse me. This is a continuing investment that needs to increase double of what it is now. We need to reconnect workforce development and career exploration with skilled trades now more than ever. We've been able to reach out statewide with career exploration opportunities. In return, people have been able to have had a chance and opportunity to work in their communities. Whether a gas line project develops or not, building a workforce is still needed today to maintain what is already in place in other future products. I was once told the Trans-Alaska Pipeline was a home for the old and a school for the young. Those young people are now retiring and leaving the workforce every day with history and knowledge that's not in a plans book or in a computer. It is this information that's passed on from journeyman to apprentice through the years of continuous workforce development. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to provide a short description of the Fairbanks Pipeline Training Center and its value to Alaska oil and gas, mining, construction, industries, and residents.
Thank you, Chad. And Kevin Pomeroy, welcome.
Thank you, Chairman Murkowski. My name is Kevin Pomeroy. I'm the business manager of Labor's Local 942 and the vice president of the Alaska District Council of Labor's. Serving in these roles, I represent approximately 5,000 Alaskan union members. These workers are vital to the fabric of Alaska, involved in the construction and maintenance of roads, bridges, buildings, pipeline, process facilities, pump stations, gathering centers, power plants, mines, military facilities, as well as workers in the private sector, tourism, manufacturing, facility maintenance, and various other industry sectors. As a 47-year resident of the interior of Alaska, halfway through my construction career, the emphasis has been on stemming the declining throughput. For the last decade as business representative of the North Slope and now business manager, I've attempted to stay active on issues surrounding new field opportunities, development and expansion of the existing infrastructure for both the industry and the members I represent. If you ask a traveling laborer that comes up to Alaska, who controls most of Alaska's lands, they may in error say that, why, the state of Alaska, but many of those same peers are shocked to learn that 61% of Alaska's lands are controlled by the federal government. This leads to a significant amount of acreage and resources in Alaska, which are off limits to resource production, which means they're off limits to my members going to work on. Federal land administered by 5 agencies, BLM, Forest Service, Fish and Wildlife, National Park Service, DOD, is over 223 million acres. Put this in the perspectives, this would be 5,753 parcels of land, all the same size as the District of Columbia, or the entirety of both Texas and Utah. That's a tremendous amount of resources my members don't get an opportunity to work on. But why is it so important to folks like us who live and work here? We're a young state. We're probably one of the youngest with the exception of Hawaii. This means we're still primarily a blue-collar state. We build things. We're still building things. Yet control of 61% of lands within Alaska are those lands that are off limits to potential resource development. From a peak of 2 million barrels per day running through taps in 1988, throughput, as we've heard from Admiral, has slowed to 540,000 barrels per day and could reach its minimum operating level of 200,000 barrels per day sometime after 2020. This should be concerning for someone that is just starting his construction career. The Alaskan economy and its residents rely on the ability to develop natural resources on state and federal land. I don't support the drill baby drill mentality because too many of my bounties that filled my freezer end up from within the state. But because I want wild Alaska game coming from healthy forests and grasslands and my salmon from pristine clear waters, I strongly believe all oil and gas development in Alaska should be planned, measured, and well thought out. As the gates were opening to the NPRA, ConocoPhillips applied for permit for their Coville Delta CD5 satellite development in 2005. Due to the various government agencies voicing concern over that justify their existence, it was over 10 years to first oil on the development from the time the permit was applied for. It was 10 years that my members got to wait. CD5 was the first commercial oil production from the NPR set aside for that purpose almost 93 years ago, and it's estimated to hold 800 million barrels of oil. Additional 1.5 million acres have been set aside in the 1980s because of its potential enormous oil and gas industry resources in the 1002 area of the ANWR. I'm not going to engage in the political ongoing media controversy over whether to drill for oil in ANWR. However, I would suggest that the minimum acreage needed for development would be the perfect opportunity for the oil industry, national defense agencies, and the environmental communities to work closely together. Whether the United States as a whole is ready to admit it or not, development of the Arctic's oil and gas resources is and will continue taking place. Alaska is the only reason the United States has a seat at the table. The nearshore development of 1002 and the offshore development potentials in the Chukchi and the Beaufort could be the new environmental gold standard for oil and gas development in the Arctic and the OCS. Imagine collaboration between the oil industries, national defense agencies, and the environmental communities, as Alaska and the United States show the rest of the Arctic nations what American technology and ingenuity could achieve. As the polar ice recedes, resource development and navigation both become technologically and economically feasible through the Northwest Patches connection between the Pacific and the Atlantic Oceans. Let me switch gears just a little bit and talk about timber. It was timber that brought my family to Alaska from the forests of northern Montana in 1969. It was timber that used to employ a large amount of my members down in southeast Alaska. After the passage of the Tongass Timber Reform Act in 1990, the Forest Service had the authority to unilaterally modify the contracts on its last 2 long-term timber sales. It's no coincidence that timber sales went that year from 2,000 million board feet to about 100 million board feet by 2007. There's a local joke going around Alaska here that when the 2015 Christmas tree was chosen and harvested for the U.S. Capitol, it doubled the annual harvest that came out of the Chugach National Forest. In closing, I want to briefly address mining. It's hard to defend actions of federal government and not to make an argument on overreaching environmental enforcement when raids are being conducted out of helicopters with armed agents. It's even harder when that government agency is less than cooperative in a review of how the raid was conceived and executed. What kind of message does it send to the residents of Alaska? As I sit before you today, I feel the federal government repeatedly blocks development of Alaska's most resource-rich lands and waters. These are the same lands and waters that put many of my members to work. Alaska needs to be allowed to be the stewards of their resources, not bureaucracy 4,000 miles away. Last point I want to make in testimony has addressed the development of our natural resources. We've heard from a lot of industry. We've heard from some of the organizations that represent different industry, but the panel here represents some of the workers, some of the people who live in the interior, people that it's not just a way of life for them, it's not just a living, but it's who they are. It's why they come to Alaska. Thanks for the opportunity to talk with you.
Thank you, Kevin. Appreciate it. Well, thank you all. The common thread here is really, let's figure out a way to stay in business, to keep people working and working in well-paying jobs. And the training programs that are offered, whether it's here at the pipeline training facility or through our union programs and the training facilities, and then what we have on the private side. This is about putting Alaskans to work in jobs that are good and that can sustain their family. And I don't recall whether it was you, Chad, that used the word that the training needs to be continuous. And we all know that we live and work and operate in a state where we tend to go from boom to bust, and we have historically. And that has been difficult, but it's been our reality. And as I think about the challenges that we have as a state with recruitment and retention, listening to the comments about the aging workforce that is part of our oil and gas sector, quite honestly, right now, and Admiral Barrett faces it with TAPS. You've got great expertise, but that expertise began. I graduated from high school at a time that every able-bodied young man, at the time it was mostly men, were going off and working on the pipeline, and they're all getting ready to retire. It's good for them, it's been good for their families, but the real question is, will their kids, the young men and women that are my son's age at 23 and 24, do they view this as an area that they want to go into? Do they see the promise as my classmates did when we were getting out of high school? And this is the concern that I have, that it is not being viewed as an area for opportunity because of the uncertainty that we have heard through now 3 panels. So the question to you all is, from your perspective, how can we work to reduce some of that uncertainty? Again, those things that are holding back our potential. We know that our men and women here in Alaska are young people. They've got extraordinary potential. We give them the training. They can pretty much do anything. But how do we reduce some of the uncertainty? And I'm going to start the question with a recognition that you have raised, Vince, about the very slim capital budget at the state level this year. So You don't have a good horizon on the state level for projects. We have a pipeline that is at 556,000 barrels a day, down well below half. We have layoffs that have been announced within the industry because of low prices. We have Shell that moved out last year because of regulatory uncertainty and disappointing results after one well at $7 billion in 7 years, but one well. So what can we do, recognizing the uncertainty that we face, to provide a little bit more optimism for young people so that they view Alaska's resource industry as a place for them to go? And I will let any one of you begin with that long question. Go ahead,
You wanna
Vince.
go first?
I guess.
We'll start alphabetically. V.
Yeah, there you go. Well, that's a pretty tough question, obviously. And looking at what's happening in Juneau, I guess one of the things we need to do, we're only 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks from the end of the regular legislative session, and they're talking about really what's the fiscal plan going to be for the future. And they've got to come up with something that substantially knocks out this $4 billion deficit, or people are going to be walking away from their homes like they did in the 80s. And already the credit rating agencies have downgraded the state's credit rating based on not having a fiscal plan. But the good news is we are one of the most rich states, not only in resources in the ground, but with our $53 billion in the permanent fund. There are opportunities to solve some of these problems and get the budget in line. And once that's in line, I think, then we can look at investing in, like I said, one of the things that the legislature right now appears to be fearful of doing is making an infrastructure investment looking out by using GO bonds or whatever other measures that we have available to seed some of that infrastructure that's going to be necessary for a long-range fiscal plan. I mean, if we have to have a longer-range fiscal plan that includes figuring out how to streamline a lot of the regulatory obstacles and permitting that we find in trying to develop resources in the state. But in general, I mean, we've got to get the state's fiscal house in order, and then we have to look to the federal government as well. And then streamlining a lot of these projects, I think, will open up opportunities going forward.
What else for certainty? Lisa?
So I think there's very little, I jotted down some notes just listening to the different testimony, and uncertainty, transparency, unpredictability, state sovereignty were all words that almost every single panelist has used up there, and so many of those are within our control. There's no reason why we can't provide certainty to industry, why we can't have a predictable investment climate. And for our chamber, we used to focus on the local and state issues, and now at the forefront of almost every single one of our committee meetings, of which industry is well represented, they've got experts serving on each of our committees, we're talking about how can we streamline and reform the federal regulations that have burdened the private sector and have put Alaskans out of work. You mentioned how many the thousands of employees that get laid off when industry is operating in an unpredictable environment. I probably don't have the solution here for how to move forward, but it's evident when you have 12 people up here speaking that the uncertainty is really killing private sector investment, jobs, and just the economic opportunities here in Alaska.
Chad?
We talked about the young generation, the new generation coming into the workforce. I often wonder, what do they know about it? Do they have an opportunity to go explore these careers? We look a lot at the Fairbanks, Anchorage, Juneau areas, but there's a lot of rural communities out there with a lot of people that are very talented people. I think bringing them in and allowing these people to come in and explore different career options will help us build a better workforce. People are going to be able to go to work. It's something that they enjoy, not just something that they're just put into because that's what's available at the time. Requiring hours, training hours on various projects. The state of Alaska requires hours on certain heavy highway projects. Why can't we do that on the military bases? Why can't we do that on the North Slope? Granted, it's private up there, but we have to utilize the resources that are walking out the door right now somehow.
It's a great point on the education. I was at a Alaska Youth Corps Challenge program. Their graduates were given an option for an additional month apprenticeship with different unions, and I happened to go out to where they were at the Iron Workers Training Facility, and you had all these 16, 17, 18-year-olds that were being exposed for the first time. Most of these young people were young people who were from villages around the state. Young women saying, man, I want to be an iron worker. It was good, but education is a key piece. Kevin?
Wondering, you know, it wasn't that long ago that young folks that didn't want to go into construction, you know, they've got a college career. We've had more that are looking at, while they're in construction, they kind of see the writing on the wall, not as many opportunities as they had originally thought. They're actually in construction, but I've got some that are talking about going back and continuing their education. So, you know, having another fallback. It used to be the kind of construction was the fallback. If you could work with your hands, you could pretty much make a living, but that's not always the case anymore. You know, I think it was Bronk that had set up here at one of the early panels, and he had the bigger list of the new standards or the new, you know, thou shalts. There seems like there'd be a way to make those folks, to compel them to come to Alaska or wherever the region is that they're getting ready to reinterpret. They're going to rewrite the plans book on how these folks play the game. There ought to be a way to make them come to Alaska and see some of the obstacles that they may not be seeing from sitting in their, you know, ivory tower rewriting these rule books, if you will. Because it's scary. I mean, construction, we've got, you get to a place where you don't have the workforce in the queue. Like Chad had mentioned, you don't create a welder overnight. You don't create a welder in a year, 2 years. You don't create a operating engineer in a couple of years. I mean, you've got to have excuse me, you've got to have enough sustainable work out in front of the workforce, keep them engaged, and keep them wanting to be in Alaska. Otherwise, we're going to wake up one day with a big project, and we're going to have to import all of our labor because they will no longer be here.
I'm going to ask kind of a two-part, well, not a two-part. I'm just going to ask a question, and you can figure out which section of it you want to ask. Admiral Barrett, as the head of Alaska Pipeline, I think has been a very strong proponent for continuing the life of the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. The best way to do it is not engineering technologies that allow it to be reheated at certain points. It's to fill up the pipe. And when we think about ways to fill up the pipe, in my view, the answer that is most direct and clear is through ANWR. Accessing a small portion of ANWR relatively close to the main pipeline on land. It is, in my view, one of those opportunities that we have been foreclosed by the federal government, and yet it is something that it can stand as that answer to the solution. And when we're talking about creating jobs and the incumbent benefits that are associated, that ANWR is clearly a part of that answer. We also recognize that there are many of your folks that are engaged in not only oil and gas opportunities, but they are participating in alternative and renewable energy projects around the state, whether it's wind, you look at Fire Island as you come flying in, whether it's hydropower, extraordinary hydropower resources, some of our other abundant renewable resources. So this will be last question to each of you in terms of our energy opportunities as a state and how you see the workforce and the jobs opportunities for them. Talk to me a little bit about greater access to our oil resources, ANWR, offshore, NPRA, renewables. Where do you see that future?
I'm trying to remember the year, but I think it was in the 90s. But I was in D.C. Your dad was the senator, and Senator Stevens and Congressman Young, and we had a gigantic building trades convention in D.C. We did a march, basically walked up to the Capitol steps. We had 1,000 people there. The stars were aligned, allegedly. And we're still hoping for that opportunity. And I think the building trades unions in general have always been extremely supportive. I've had conversations with folks that had no idea really what the true situation is up there, and that it could be done, as I think, very safely, that it's the best opportunity to access, like you said, convenient to the pipeline's location, et cetera. And there's a lot of I guess, information or education out there. But I think we still have to never leave that opportunity to weigh in against anyone, or all due respect to anyone that objects to drilling in ANWR or whatnot. I do think it's probably one of the most safe places that we could access safely and do this right, that doesn't have to worry about a lot of the worse conditions in the offshore, which I still think we can do most of these things safely. So we can't give up on pushing that. You mentioned renewables. I was chair of the state's Renewable Fund, Energy Fund Advisory Committee that was doing about $50 million a year in renewable projects all around the state. And of course, right now, we can't add to that because of the state's situation. It'd be great if there were any federal dollars to push on expanding renewable opportunities. But one of the concrete things I'd like to see, Chad alluded to it a little bit, is recently Governor Walker put in an executive order that beefed up apprenticeship utilization on anything that the state contracts. I would suggest that the federal government could do something similar if you want to always have a pipeline, if you will, of workers available and in projects. If there could be some kind of a specific apprenticeship utilization language associated with any bids that are put out for work on federal jobs, whether it's on military bases or anything else, that is one way to keep folks in the training pipeline. Short of that, we've just, like I said, we stand ready to plug people in. We have outreach efforts everywhere, local hire that we can implement in villages and everywhere else, that any communities that would be, have a project being done nearby. So, like I said, we stand ready, and we will do all that we can to help in formulating a long-range plan to put Alaskans to work for the future.
Other comments on energy job opportunities?
I think we have a tremendous asset just up on the hill here, our university, research and development. We need to be able to leverage what they do up there. For every dollar they bring in, they're able to leverage $7 back into the economy. And I know that we're facing unprecedented budget issues right now, but we really need to get that fiscal house in order. The military is fortunate to have serious dollars coming to us by the way of military construction to kind of ride that bubble a little bit. But we have tremendous assets up on the hill, and here in this building. I always love saying, we're all in the oil industry because we truly are. I think when people say close ANWR and NPRA, and then you look at the turmoil that's happening in the Middle East, and we have our resources right here on American soil, and we're not able to produce them, is shameless. And I think there's so much more that we could do for that. I'm not an expert in that industry at all, but what I do know is when people are working, the economy is thriving, and these guys have Alaskans working, and the private sector is thriving as well. So Alaskans have done it best. We have a track record of producing resources responsibly, oil and gas, and into mining. I know that just for every oil and gas direct job, 20 jobs are created in the indirectly, and those are in the nonprofit world, in the private sector. Those are the restaurants. Those are the schools. Those are everything. Everything is touched by oil and gas industry, and to not recognize that hurts us. I think there's lots more that we could do.
Chet?
You mentioned Anwar. I can honestly say I've been there, spent a lot of time right in that vicinity. I spent 5 years at Point Thompson, which borders Anwar. I've been to Camden Bay, which is the beach right at Anwar. From 1991, from the time I started working there until 2005 when I left, the difference in the environmental policies and the safety policies is tremendous. And I don't think a lot of people understand that from what it was when the Navy was up on the North Slope in the 1940s and 1950s and what they left behind to where it is today with virtually zero footprint left behind. I mean, the companies are going out, the contractor has to go out and he's accountable for every little thing, not even only after the project's gone in the wintertime, but they go back out in the summertime to clean up after those projects. It's a huge thing. It's a huge difference. Developing our resources, renewable energy, oils, mining, we need to do something. We need to move forward somewhere. We got to have the people to do it. Like Ms. Herbert said, it's not just the construction, oil, gas industry. It's everybody this is going to affect. If a gas line comes into play, you're going to need people in restaurants. You're going to need people selling ATVs and boats and repairing cars. Across the street, there's a help wanted sign that's been up over there for 3 to 4 years that has not been taken down. They're going to have to put up a bigger sign, is what it boils down to. We need to start developing these people. We don't want to train just to train. We got to have places for them to go. Thank you.
Thank you. Kevin, you get the final word.
Senator, I would agree with you that Anwar should be something to take a look at. I mean, you're looking at a development that's been compared to a postage stamp sitting on a football field. That would be the type of acreage and impact it would do. I've noticed as I've come through construction, my construction career, I used to be the young guy on the field or on the spread, and it's been a lot of years since I've been the young guy on the field. But one thing I have noticed is I've visited some of the job sites up there as an agent is there's a younger workforce that by it being indoctrinated into their training, they just have a higher level of awareness for the environment. Not to say that, Chad and myself, when we were up there working on the oil field, that it wasn't there. It's just that environmental component is something that is put into our training as we go through the apprenticeship programs. You can't go from one contractor to the next without seeing some impact of that. Just like the safety record, Alaska, has, and ConocoPhillips and BP, I mean, in Alaska, they've kind of pioneered and led the charge, if you will, on safety records. And it's when it becomes part of the culture that you're there. And I truly believe that we've got young men and women in the apprenticeship programs and within just the skilled trades that have that same sense of environmental stewardship that has become who they are. And they're going to be the workforce that's up there working on those projects. Do they want to see a catastrophe? No. And I truly believe that they'll do everything they can to minimize it. I'd love to think that Alaska could rely on renewables, but we're just down in Juneau here a couple of weeks ago, and with the low snowpack year, there were a couple of folks that were wondering if they were going to have enough snow melt in their reservoir to run their hydro. It doesn't take an Einstein to know that after 1 o'clock in the afternoon in Fairbanks, Alaska, solar's not going to do you any good. So you've got to have as much as you can try to become and develop those renewable and more environmentally friendly, as some people term them, energy. You've still, here in Alaska, particularly in the interior and in some of the rural communities, you still are reliant on natural gas and hydrocarbons. And so I think the future is to continue to develop the safest way to access them, and that's through your workforce.
Great comments all around. I think it really helped to round out the conversation today. So thank you for the time that you've given us and really the thought and for the men and women and the families that you represent. Because at the end of the day, this is about Alaska. This is about our home. So thank you very much. We will thank you for that. For the benefit of those here, we're just about to the 4 o'clock hour, but we had made arrangements with the committee to allow for some limited public comments to come before the committee record. As I mentioned at the outset, we would ask that those who wish to provide a oral comment, try to keep your comments to just 2 minutes here, and anything that you might provide in writing will be incorporated as part of the full committee record. That will not be limited to a 2-minute statement. So you certainly have greater flexibility with your written statement. I'm told that there was a list that was somewhere. And so if I can, what I will do is I'll call the first 3 people to just be kind of on deck. First, we will be led off by Bernie Carl. He will be followed by Susan Todd, and then Princess Lucage. And I don't know if I'm pronouncing the last name correctly. So if you would just come to the microphone, and I would ask that you state your name. What else do they need for the record? Okay, if you can provide your name, spell your last name so that it is included correctly as part of the record, and a business affiliation if you have one.
Bernie Carl, K-A-R-L, Chena Hot Springs Resort. And what else did you want?
That's
Spell your last name.
K-A-R-L. I did spell that.
good. We're
All
good.
right, Senator, thank you for this opportunity. It seems to me there's more opportunity now than there's ever been in the history of man. But it's not business as usual. I didn't hear one speaker talk about the opportunities in a smokestack or the opportunities in a landfill. It's insane that we have smokestacks. You know why we have them? Because the solution to pollution is dilution. Why do we have a landfill? Nature has no waste. It's insane that we don't take charge of what we have. I'm telling you that there should never be a landfill. There should never be a smokestack, and we're smart enough to do something about it. The reason we don't do anything about it is because we're addicted to oil in one arm, and we're addicted to greed in the other. Do we need oil? Absolutely. There's more opportunity on the North Slope than there's ever been. C1 through C6 is the building blocks for most all chemicals in the world. Our government wants to build a pipeline and ship it out of here and take 30 pieces of silver. Shame on us. That's the building blocks for the world. We set on the world's largest gas field, second world's largest gas field. We should develop that. All the highest and best paid jobs should be in Alaska. For $4 billion in 4 years, with Alaskan help, which happens to be some of the best help in the world, we could put 1 million barrels a day of metro into that pipeline. If you take CH4, you take out the 4 molecules of hydrogen, and you bond that with nitrogen, and you bond that with CO2. Yeah, CO2, 12.5% of that fuel is CO2. Now you make a liquid fuel, and that fuel is 100,000 BTUs per gallon. You burn it in any engine and store it in any tank that's already here. Alaska should lead this energy parade. We're following. Shame on us. We need to lead. We have the brightest people here. Our indigenous people have the highest IQ of any indigenous people on the earth. They own a lot of this land and resources, as you heard. So if you want to look at the top 14 corporations in Alaska, number 4 is Linden. The other 13 are all native corporations. So that proves my point. I only have just a second left, but thank you for the opportunity. It's shameful what we're doing. The only thing we need is 0 federal oversight and 0 federal help. We want to make your job easy. We got to stop taking your help, and we damn sure don't need any more federal oversight, and this state could grow.
Thank you, Mr. Carl. Thank you. Susan Todd.
Yeah, that's a hard act to follow.
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you, Senator, for the opportunity to testify. I'm Susan Todd, T-O-D-D. I'm a mother of two, and I've been a professor of natural resource management at the university for 26 years. I've been in Alaska 41 years. I came up for the pipeline boom, which was a hell of a lot of fun. I have always felt development can be done responsibly, and I used to get a kick out of bumper stickers that said, Alaskans for global warming. But with the increasing evidence of climate change, in 1999, I started including a unit on global warming in my courses. Every year, I updated my lectures with the latest statistics. Every year, they were scarier. I went from being unconcerned to being deeply worried. All 10 of the hottest years on record have been since 1998. The top 4 records have been since 2010, with 2015 breaking them by a shocking margin. 2015 is now the warmest year on record by far. The scariest thing about climate change is that warming creates more warming. After a tipping point, global warming will fuel itself, and it will be unstoppable. Sea level is rising exponentially. Instead of moving 10 villages, we could be moving 50. The economic and social cost of losing coastal cities is incalculable. China alone anticipates 350 million refugees from their coastline. The world is having trouble absorbing just 2 million refugees from Syria. What will happen when we have 1 billion coastal refugees on the move? These are just a few of the impacts we face. The primary cause is CO2 emissions. There is an overwhelming scientific consensus on climate change, and a recent article, a scientific article by James Hansen and 18 other globally recognized scientists had this to say: there is a real danger that we will hand young people a climate system that is out of control. It's hard. We conclude that the message our climate change science delivers to society and policymakers is this: we have a global emergency. Scientific journals don't usually say things like that. Innovative technologies and renewable energy sources are the answer, and time is of the essence. Americans, as Bernie said, are the most innovative people on the planet. We entered World War II flying wooden biplanes, and within just 5 years, we had jet fighters. When we decide to solve tough problems, we do it. To stop climate change, we must transition off fossil fuels as soon as possible with new sources of energy and new technologies. I urge you to do all you can to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels and to develop renewable energy sources. The question is not, can we afford to do this? The question is, can we afford not to? Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Princess.
Hi,
welcome.
I'm Princess Lucaj, last name Lucaj, and you'll have to excuse me because I'm a little nervous right now, but I just am standing before you as an Alaska Native woman and mother, and what I'm most concerned about is maintaining the ecological wellness and integrity of our natural resources. I'm also wary of the erosion of the public's voice and decisions that have to do with the destruction or privatization and commodification of our precious, life-giving resources, such as our coastal waters and riverways. When you talk about streamlining processes for mining and oil and gas development, it frightens me, quite frankly, because EPA regulations are there for a reason, to protect you and me, to protect the public. I'm sure that if we hadn't had public protest long ago, we would have seen development on the coastal plain of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge or at Pebble Mine, or seen HB 77, also known as the Silencing Alaskans Act, go through last year. So the real threat to our national security are the devastating effects of climate change. The real threat to our overall well-being is to our wild foods. It's what's happening to the Chinook, to our marine life, and to our caribou, moose, and migratory birds. We are not the only species that lives in dreams on this planet. What right does the porcupine caribou herd have to return each year to its birthing and nursing grounds on the coastal plain of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge? We cannot drill our way out of the predicament we find ourselves in as a human species. We must begin looking elsewhere to create jobs. We are suffering today because we didn't do a good job of diversifying our economy. When I was 17 years old at Lathrop High School, a New York Times article dated May 29, 1990 read, "As oil bounty drains, Alaska becomes uneasy." In the article, then Governor Steve Cooper speaks of his optimism about our ability to diversify our economy and that taxes could make up from where we are not able to expand. That was 15 years ago. 15 years ago, and I feel very, very strongly that the problem of Alaska's socioeconomic and ecological, environmentally sustainability has been pawned off on my generation. Why didn't we do anything 20 years ago when we knew that this was coming down the pipeline, literally? It was gonna drain out eventually. This has been a one-pony show, a one-stop shop. Why are we still having this conversation? It's just business as usual. To me, it feels like business as usual. It's time for us to stretch our minds and hearts in innovation and work together to transition our economy to one that's truly sustainable and ecologically sound. We need to fund renewables and to transition our workforce up to then to work in that field, and we need to encourage and incentivize our local economies, and we need every Alaskan to engage in this process of transitioning our economy off of fossil fuels. We should really think about what these words mean: progress, prosperity, development. Masicho.
Thank you, Princess. The next three names we have are Eric Schatzel, Tristan Glawa, and Odin Miller. So if Eric is here, great. Welcome. I think you're going to have to get just a little closer so that they can pick you up on the record there.
Thank you, Senator Murkowski, members of the committee.
Keep going.
Our state has a goal of 50% electric.
Eric, I need you to spell your last name because it's a
sorry.
little bit challenging.
Last name is Schetzel, S-C-H-A-E-T-Z-L-E. Our state has a goal of 50% electric generation from renewable sources by 2025. As a whole, Alaska already produces over 28% of our electricity with water, wind, and other renewable energy sources, and has seen a 20-fold increase in wind power generation since 2007. Kodiak generates over 99% of its power from renewable energy resources. They are now switching from oil to electric heat pumps to heat their homes, as they are in Seward and Juneau as well. Solar energy has grown considerably across the state, from the Northwest Arctic Borough to Copper Valley. In Fairbanks, the Golden Valley Electric Association is exploring a community solar project. This is where the world is headed, and Alaska is extremely well positioned.
Hang on just one second. Can he still keep talking or no? It's all about storage, I'm telling you. There we go.
Alaska is extremely well positioned to lead it with abundant renewable resources, a skilled workforce, and splendid northern engineering know-how to develop the technologies that can lead America toward a low-pollution future and energy independence. Last year, Mark Jacobson at Stanford created a 100% renewable roadmap for Alaska. We have a solar resource comparable to Germany, geothermal resources suitable for geothermal power projects, over 90% of the nation's river current and tidal energy resources, and outstanding wind resources. Our Arctic neighbors are already doing this. Finland has a 100% renewable energy plan. Russia recently completed renewable energy system modeling. It's one of the most energy competitive regions. Canada created a transition pathway towards a low carbon future. 144 countries currently have renewable energy policy targets. Refocusing investment on renewable energy providers would shift oil and pipeline workers to building energy production systems that take advantage of Alaska's renewable energy potential. The transition to a low-carbon society and economy will enhance prosperity and well-being, modernize infrastructure, develop regional renewable energy sources, and create new businesses and new jobs in a diversified, innovative, knowledge-based economy. According to research published just this last Thursday, 24th of March, in Global Trends in Renewable Energy Investment 2016. In 2015, it was produced a new record for global investment in renewable energy. The amount of money committed to renewables, excluding large hydroelectric projects, rose to $285.9 billion. That was more than double that of new coal and gas generation. Thank you for your attention.
Eric, thank you very much. Tristan Glawa, welcome.
Thank you, Senator. My name is Tristan Glowa, Glowa. So I grew up in and continue to love living in Fairbanks, and I'm currently a student at Yale University, taking a semester to be here at UAF, taking classes on Arctic issues. I've been an active community organizer for several years here, and currently organized with the Fairbanks Climate Action Coalition. So we represent a large number of and growing number of individuals in the community here, faith groups, students, Alaska Native leaders, scientists across the board. And as someone who plans to continue living in Fairbanks and work for this community for the rest of my life, I have to say that I'm concerned about the future that you're envisioning here of expanded fossil fuel production, as our community here is seriously at risk from our global and domestic fossil fuel dependence. In Alaska, we are on the front lines of fossil fuel-induced climate change. This is indisputable. The worsening wildfires, permafrost melt, unpredictable winters are already affecting this community. Climate change is an existential threat to my generation and all future generations. In an immediate sense, oil dependency is also hurting this community, as our lack of revenue diversification has resulted in harsh program of austerity being proposed for our schools and universities. This seriously concerns me, as we cannot afford to cut back our investment in the human capital we need to move past these tough times. The solution that we need for the well-being of my generation and future generations is not to double down on fossil fuel extraction. It's not to drill in the Arctic refuge against the wills of the Gwich'in Steering Committee. We need to immediately work to diversify our economy and transition away from the fossil fuel economy. We should be focusing on green jobs, building clean energy systems, energy efficiency, sustainable infrastructure, and a resilient local food system. We need you to lead in this. This is the leadership that we need. Thank you.
Thank you, Tristan. Odin Miller, welcome.
Good afternoon, and thank you for allowing me the opportunity to comment. As a lifelong Alaskan, I would like to invite Senator Murkowski and the members of these panels to fully embrace climate science. Its implications for Alaska are abundantly clear. Climate change is a grave threat to our state's future. The economic consequences of climate change are also very clear. It's going to cost Alaska billions and billions of dollars to adapt. There are currently 4 villages needing relocation, and our state has yet to find funding for even one of those relocations. Dozens more communities are threatened by climate change and will likely eventually need to be moved. Referring to Alaska's economy, Ms. Herbert recently said, everything is touched by the oil and gas industry. I would point out that everything is touched by the climate crisis we're in. If we keep putting all our economic drivers in oil, gas, and mining, these climate adaptation costs are going to get much, much worse and overwhelm our state's capacity. Large new oil projects may bring temporary wealth and high-paying jobs, but they are robbing younger Alaskans like me of our future. As long as Alaska makes no effort to look beyond oil and gas, it will keep advocating at a federal level against any measures that would meaningfully mitigate climate change. Keeping federal fossil fuel subsidies in place, for example, makes it difficult for sustainable sources of economic development to become competitive in our state. I acknowledge that it will not be easy to shift away from our state's dependence on oil development, and I think we need to start having serious conversations at all institutional levels about how to diversify our economy in ways that would still create high-paying jobs. As a start, I would like to urge you, Senator Murkowski, to vote against the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which would shift many of our jobs overseas, drive down wages, and impede our government's ability to enact policies needed to sustainably develop our economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Odin. The next three on the list are Darlene Herbert, Inai Begay Peter, and Anna Gadun. Welcome, Darlene.
Thank you.
Take that down, yeah.
My name is Darlene Herbert, and I'm from Fort Yukon. I was born in Fort Yukon, about 50 miles out of Fort Yukon. And my first language was Squitchin. And I had to learn to speak English when I was in 7th grade. When I went to school in 1st grade. And we weren't allowed to speak our language. And anytime we spoke our language in the school, we had our hands beaten by a ruler. And to this day, I speak my language fluently because of my grandmother. My grandmother did not know how to speak English. I retired from Local 942. I've been up on the slope for about 28 years. And after that, I did about 8 years at Clare Air Force Base. And I'd like to tell you a little story my grandmother told me. And this story came down from generation after generations for thousands of years. And the story is all over Alaska. Even the Eskimos and Tlinkits and everybody knows this. There is starvation coming. We know there is starvation coming. And if people keep destroying the land, there will be nothing. There will be no animals to eat, no fish to eat. We have to be very careful and protect our land for the generations to come to survive. We as Alaskan natives have survived on this land for thousands and thousands of years. The reason we survive on this land is because we live off the land. We did not destroy the land. I know you people have a different set of way of thinking. You guys think about money. We don't think about money. We don't think about oil. We don't think about gold. How we survive is because of the land. We have to keep our water clean and our air clean, and also keep our animals safe. We only take what we need to survive. And if we don't do this, your kids and our kids will not survive. It will be survival of the fittest, because when starvation comes, you can't eat money or eat or drink oil. When I have two granddaughters that's coming. I have two granddaughters. I have one going to college to be a pharmacist. I have another one that's going to be a lawyer. I have two younger great-grandkids that's going to be a lawyer also. I understand that we have to learn your language. I understand we have to learn your laws, which is a lot different from ours. When my mother and their parents lived, we all didn't have a piece of paper to tell us where we belonged or where our land was. We knew where our land was. We didn't need a piece of paper. Everybody knew where their land was. And we didn't need a piece of paper to tell us. I think what you guys do is you guys make too much laws for each other. You should keep it quite simple. And look at how many books that guy had. I mean, do you really honestly sit there and read every word in those things? Keep your laws simple. You know, you don't need too many words to keep. I don't understand. But anyway, I work for Local 942, and I get a very good retirement check, and I'm very thankful for that. But with the starvation coming, which is going to come, I think that you should tread very quietly and not try to destroy everything. I understand your need for money, but I have a need to save my children behind me. And I hope you take this into consideration when you make your laws, to not to destroy our animals, our fish, our water, our land, our air. If we don't save that, we will all die. And so will you. Your money can't save you then. Your oil can't save you. Your minerals can't save you. It's going to be a very hard time. My grandmother said it's going to be so hard there won't be any water. There won't be any animals. But we have to know how to live off the earth. Because everything on earth has a name in our language. Everything. I think that if you make too many laws and try to take everything out of the earth, your kids will have a very hard time, which will make my kids have a very hard time. But if you're going to do all this, make sure that you make laws to protect the land and the water and the air for the generation behind us. Thank you.
Thank you, Darlene. And I'm going to have you spell your full name. Thank you.
My name is Ine, E-N-E-I. Peter is the last name, P-E-T-E-R. And I just have a few quick comments to say, and I would really like to give most of my time to an expert here in the room who didn't get a chance to sign up yet. But very quickly, I just want to echo for the record officially that not all of your constituents want to continue Alaska down the path of fossil fuel economic development and mining. I'm from a resident here in Fairbanks, but also have lived in Arctic Village, Alaska, mother, a Native woman, mother of 3 Alaska Native children, who I really feel we're all doing a disservice to if we do not begin transitioning our economy now, if we do not begin finding other job sources, training in our workforce towards a different economy. I heard on this panel over and over the uncertainty that exists right now on that path of economic development. And so my question is, why are we continuing to put billions of dollars into supporting that path when that path has brought us to this economic decline? When, like so many before me had said, Princess said, this has been forecast for so long. Now we really need to look to our leaders to take very clear steps away from that economy. We need to invest more into renewables. We need to provide whatever those subsidies are to the renewable energy sector, as well as other green businesses. So with that, I want to ask if I can, I don't know if I have any time left, actually. But.
Yes, I'd like to get through those that are on the list before we add any others, if we can do that. Yes. Yes.
Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you, Enai. The next 3 are Anna Gadoon, Pamela Miller, and Lois Epstein. So is Anna not here? Okay. All right, let's go to Pamela Miller. There's just a couple more after this. Just out of respect for the list here. Good afternoon.
Hello, my name is Pam Miller. Thank you for allowing me to testify here today. I am here representing myself and my small business, Arctic Connections. I depend on the wildlands, our tourists, and the remarkable resources that we have in the state of Alaska. Alaska is at an exciting time as we work to transform our economy away from oil, gas, and other fossil fuels in the extractive-based economy. I don't know that I heard the words climate change or global warming from a single one of the 12 panelists today. I don't think they represent the views adequately of the people of Fairbanks or of the state of Alaska and where we are in our economy. And I will make a quote from one of our quite well-known oil experts in the state, Larry Pursley, from a recent press article on the radio. We have to accept we're not the oil and gas state that we once thought we were, and we're never going to be the oil and gas state that we once were. Because this isn't just prices, this is production. We're down 3/4 from the peak, and no one out there claims to have another Prudhoe Bay in their back pocket. So it is going to be an adjustment for Alaska. In crisis, there is opportunity, and I think there is incredible opportunities in Alaska. And I believe this hearing and the 12 testifiers very narrowly looked at what is a resource of Alaska and what is our wealth. People have been living in the heart of Alaska for over 12,000 years, thriving on salmon. They did not come up on a steamship. They've been here. We've been here. When I look out right now with transforming this economy, I'm looking out 50 years. Where are we going to be? We can get there. We have the incredible people. We have resources, clean air, clean water, world-class conservation system of lands that people come to from all over the world because we have something no one else has. Folks talked about the small footprint of development in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. I remember one of our great Republican champions for the refuge talking about the so-called 2,000 acres. Well, there's a small tumor in your lungs. Are you going to be worried about the greater cancer that happens? That's just a metaphor, but there is a very real difference between an intact, functioning land we have set aside for its fish, wildlife, and wilderness from the oil and gas industrialization. I think as a state, we need to look at our powerful imagination, and I think that's what was lacking a little bit as we were looking back instead of forward with the speakers here today. I have a vision that we can get to a very much different Alaska. We don't need to sacrifice our great lands like the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, some of our parks, and other places. We can get there with a renewable energy economy. We can adapt, first mitigate, and adapt to climate change. We don't know how we're going to get through that door. We can go through the door without knowing exactly what we're getting, how we're going to get there, but we need to have conversations that aren't one-sided, that aren't biased, that fully represent the great wealth we have here in Alaska. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pam. Lois Epstein, welcome.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you for having Alaskans participate in this hearing. And
I'm going to have you spell the last name, too.
Okay, it's Epstein, E-P-S-T-E-I-N. And hopefully we'll all get back to Anchorage at some point. So I am an Alaska licensed engineer, and I am also the Arctic Program Director for the Wilderness Society. What many people don't know is that the Wilderness Society has been operating in Alaska since the 1930s. And we've had our scientists working on Arctic-related issues, identifying important places, and the ecology there for since the early days of the organization. As an organization and as a member of the public, we're greatly disappointed by the lack of important perspectives at this hearing. Key missing perspectives include federal officials, conservationists, tribal members, renewable energy developers, guides and outfitters, economists, and others who support a diversified economy in the state. Alaskans deserve to have this great state treated as more than just a resource development colony. Alaska is a land of intact ecosystems with some of the cleanest and most scenic lands and waters on Earth. There's a thriving subsistence way of life in many parts of the state that it is our obligation to maintain for future generations. Finally, I'd like to add that, as many others have said, that we cannot drill or mine our way to a sustainable state budget. Our elected officials should be working towards diversifying and modernizing our economy now to prepare for the post-oil future. I recognize there's a federal role as well as a state role in that, but we're clearly at a very important time for the state in figuring out where we're going for the next few decades. So thank you. Appreciate this opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Lois. The last person that we have on the list is Art Nash, and then by popular acclaim, this gentleman will be invited once Mr. Nash has spoken. Welcome.
That's Art Nash, N-A-S-H, like the old Rambler. And I'm with the School of Natural Resources and Extension at UAF. And I just wanted to, I guess, bring attention to our food situation in the state and food security. The other issues that have been talked about are high flying. I look more at kind of the direct season to season. And I see that 95, according to the State Department of Ag, of our food comes from lower 48. That's disconcerting. Sometimes, you know, we'll have different types of disruptions. It might be 9/11. Possibly in the past we've had volcanoes that have gone off that have interrupted traffic, and then people kind of feel the pinch, or a barge doesn't make it up, and people start to think about food. I think that one of the components of having affordable food in Alaska is energy, and whether it comes from coal, oil, natural gas, wood. I think that a continued work and policy and assistance on trying to figure out how to have energy lengthen our season, our growing season, is just a good investment for the state. Right now, a lot of growers will tell you that they're not going to plant until it's 46 degrees, which is usually, even in a season like last year where we had a lot of water and in the snow evacuated with early breakup, they start in June. And then they pretty much end at first frost in September in the interior. With using energy wisely, again, regardless of the source, it would be good to try to figure out ways to lengthen the season, to go ahead and get another month after frost, a couple of months early. I think that energy, obviously, and the cost of energy has a lot to do with when we can extend those seasons and how. But I also think that with some of the things that have been talked about, there are also opportunities that people may see as failures or disasters that may benefit us. The fact that we do have now a very strong source of water that we can draw on for ag and start to hopefully figure out how to tap, whether it be from, you know, various natural sources, such as last year when we had deluges that we've never had, different type of weather events that are new. Let's take them on as opportunities and figure out how to put in new crops, how to maybe go ahead and ride on the back of some invasive species that are going to come anyway, figure out which types of foods grow best and learn from other states. So I know that food hasn't been the tenor of most of the discussion, but it is linked with energy, and I think that with the permafrost melting, there are going to be some opportunities for maybe more cropland and trying to figure things out. And these are things that, like I say, may seem to be on the fringe of what most of today's discussion is about. But I think it's worth, as you go back to Washington and mingle with other committees and such, it's worth trying to kick around and kick the can down the road a little bit and trying to figure out how we can get more food growing in the state. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nash. And I'm sorry, but I don't know your name. But welcome to the committee.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I didn't think you were going to go past 4, so I thought my odds were really low for signing up, so I didn't.
You get to bring up the end here, so
Yeah,
thank you.
My name is Greg Egan. My company is Remote Power Inc. I have a small company here.
Can you spell your last name, Mr. Egan?
E-G-A-N. And I have a company here in Fairbanks, and we've designed and installed solar and wind power systems for a couple decades, mostly small stuff. And so I think a lot of people think that's what I want to talk about, and that wasn't really it. But I will mention that there's, and I'm sure you're aware of this, in the lower Kuskokwim area, I want to say Quingilingak, Tuntuntuliak, and 2 other villages, they have systems in place now where they're turning the diesel engines off and running off of wind, and they're using thermal storage in the, they look like little Toyo stoves, only they're electric and they have fire brick in them.
Seen it.
Yeah, I know you have. And there was a nice article on Alaska News Nightly maybe a month or so ago that talked about it that I was lucky enough to hear. So anyway, there's some things that are not pie in the sky. They're not far off in the distance. They're actually happening now, and they're happening in Alaska with renewable energy. So I think that it's okay that we focus on that. We don't have to try to reinvent the wheel. What I really wanted to, what I was thinking of speaking about was a little bit about climate change and try to explain something. I think this is really important, okay? And I'm an old refrigeration mechanic. I'm not a scientist. But from the, there was a, James Hansen has a recent paper, and one of the things he says here, he's talking about climate change. The economic and social cost of losing functionality of all coastal cities is practically incalculable. Now, this is a guy who talked to Congress in 1988. He's a NASA scientist, and he and 18 other co-authors, had this study here recently, a couple weeks ago it came out. We suggest that a strategy relying on adaptation to such consequences will be unacceptable to most of humanity. So it is important to understand this threat as soon as possible. So to try to help with that, okay, as a refrigeration mechanic, I learned a long time ago that in order to melt a pound of ice, change it from ice to water, so just phase change, not temperature. This is 16 ounces. This is about a pound of ice. It takes 144 BTUs, okay? It takes the same 144 BTUs to warm over 17 gallons of water 1 degree. So the reason this is important to understand is that when you read these papers from these paleoclimatologists and such that talk about how many gigatons of ice have been melted and so on and so forth, and you go outside, well, it's a little bit warmer out than it used to be. All that heat to melt that ice is huge. And if you think about it as a hunter, if you have a Sears freezer, 18 cubic foot, 20 cubic foot, you shoot a moose, you drag him home, and you throw that moose in that freezer and you think it's going to freeze, you find out that the stuff around the edges froze and the stuff in the middle rotted because it takes so much heat to change the state of liquid to ice or ice to liquid. It takes 1 BTU is what is needed to raise 1 pound of water 1 degree Fahrenheit. That's just a definition, okay? 144 BTUs to change a pound of ice to a pound of water at 32 degrees, not change the temperature at all. So it just takes, it's an exponential thing. And it's hard for us to wrap our minds around that, like it's hard for us to wrap our minds around compound interest. But anyway, whether it's hard to wrap around or not, that's what's going on. And it's going to cause everyone big problems, be they Alaskans, be they one of the billion coastal refugees in the future. That I think is an important point. And I hope it makes sense. This is a pound of water compared to over 17 gallons of water. To melt this, you can heat 17 gallons of water, from 33 degrees to 34. Hope that makes sense. Thank you so much for letting me speak.
Thank you, Mr. Egan. I'd like to thank the 13 people then who provided public testimony. Appreciate your comments as well as that of the panel of 12 Alaskans that we had heard from. As I mentioned at the outset, those that might wish to submit written testimony to be incorporated as part of the record, it will be held open for 2 weeks from today. and you may submit that testimony by going to the Energy Committee website, is that correct? Or maybe not, maybe hard copy? Talk to Annie. Talk to Annie Hoffler right over here, and Annie will make sure that we have the right way to communicate any additional input that you may have. I mentioned my thanks to Chad Hutchison and those here at the training center for opening their doors, but I also want to give a specific shout out to Michelle Foley. I don't know if Michelle is still here. Oh, there she is over there. But Michelle, thank you. You have made this happen very effortlessly and easily in working with my staff on the Energy Committee, so we appreciate that as well. Again, the intention from today's hearing, in addition to hearing from those that provided testimony, was really to provide a base for examination of those ways and methods that we can help facilitate opportunities for Alaskans wherever they may be, whether they are down in Ketchikan, Barrow, or places in between, in recognizing our full potential as Alaskans, but also the opportunities and the challenges that present themselves in a place that is as unique and remarkable and filled with human resources as well as God-given resources, and our responsibility to one another in that. So thank you for the opportunity to be with you. We have overextended thanks to Mount Pavlov today. And with that, the Energy and Natural Resources Committee is adjourned.